Custer at Little Bighorn, and in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle, and they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page and a half introduction to the book, and then it becomes a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by bear, which is his name in English, also later known as Starlay. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described here in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language, as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849 and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the grass battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirits, and you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred Isaba. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors, such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. The Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this faithful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving at Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life. Mini, Bukoni, the Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the Earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikoju spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history, not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Harley Zephyr.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's kick off this week, the last official week of summer. Boy, the sun is starting to come up late already. It was usually it wakes me up at 5 a.m. This morning it was 6. With Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman Khanna is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro, as in representative, Rep. Ro, R-O, Khanna. And Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program.
Great to be back on.
Thank you. And I should add, Congressman Khanna is with us for the hour. He's taking your calls. Our telephone number is 202-808-9925. And if you have, questions for the congressman this hour on pretty much any topic at all. Congressman, I noticed that the John McCain is going to be lying in state in the rotunda, which is something that has only happened, I guess, 32 times since Abraham Lincoln. And I'm curious if you know why he gets that honor, or anybody gets that honor. Frankly, I don't know anything about the process. And then secondly, the Cadet Bone Spurs here has apparently ordered the flags not to fly at half-mast over the White House and the Washington Memorial, or the Washington Monument, which just seems bizarrely petty. I mean, even his tweet didn't reference John McCain. It had a picture of him, and it said, I'm send out my heart out to his family. Maybe he went to Oz and got a new heart. I don't know, but it's... Anyhow, let me toss it to you. Your thoughts on all this?
Trump's whole reaction is petty and sad. I mean, the people who decide to lie in state are the leadership of the House and Senate, and I think McConnell requested it, and Schumer agreed, and Pelosi and Ryan agreed, and they have the authority to extend that honor for anyone who they deem worthy. You can actually even be a private citizen. I think the last private citizen to have been extended that honor was Rosa Parks. But there is John McCain was a prisoner of war. I don't think anyone doubts that he was a hero in how he conducted himself then, and he has always been someone who speaks his mind, and even when you disagree with him, there's been sense of independence when he worked with Russ Feingold on campaign finance reform, when he spoke about a town hall protester who was calling Obama a monster, and he had the guts to say that was wrong. And so there are times at his best where he has exemplified independence. But for Trump to continue his demonization of John McCain, I mean, the point is here, he's appealing to a base. I mean, I saw a poll that only 41% of Republicans support or have a favorable view of John McCain. And that is because Donald Trump has had a 4-year or 3-year campaign against this man. And it just shows the radicalization of the Republican Party under Trump, and that Trump has lost any sense of decency. And in our founding, people used to have duels, and they still would say something decent about someone on their passing. I mean, there's absolutely no honor in Donald Trump.
Yeah, this is a sad and unfortunate presidency. To use his words, sad, I guess. I believe this is the last week that members of Congress are back in their districts, presumably to hold town halls. I don't think any Republicans are holding town halls anymore. But what are your thoughts on the current state of politics, and what are your expectations for the next week or so?
Well, I've been back in my district, and I am enthusiastic about the energy that we have going into the midterms. You know, I was out, in addition to being in my district, I went out for a couple candidates. One person, Richard Ojeda in West Virginia, is 2 points up in a district that Trump carried by 73%. So, I mean, we've got candidates in heavily red areas whose message is resonating. And when you see what they're talking about giving people basic health care, making sure that folks have real jobs, and that we're not giving away these tax cuts to very wealthy millionaires. And it seems that the message is resonating. And then I think the indictments of Cohen and the immunity decision to give immunity to the CFO of the Trump organization, my sense is it's had an impact in a way that other things haven't in the investigation. People now see that there's criminal conduct involved, and that it's just shameful that you have criminal conduct around so close to the president. So I'm very optimistic heading into the midterms.
Yeah, me too. Knock wood. Although the Republican voter suppression efforts are really getting scary. I mean, now that the Supreme Court has said that what Ohio was doing with what used to be called caging, I mean, there used to be a restraining order against the Republican Party for doing this that goes back to the 60s, as I recall. And go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that there was just a special election in Ohio, and I haven't seen this confirmed in quote, mainstream media. But I've seen on several of the election integrity blogs and things like that this guy won his election by a margin that may well have been within the range of the number of votes of the number of voters, mostly Democratic voters, people with Hispanic last names or common African American last names, who were purged in Ohio. And so, that gives me pause and concern whether that case actually, works out that way or not. Certainly, we know that, Florida, the purges have been so effective that even with all the voter registration that's been going on for the last 2 years, there's fewer registered voters in Florida right now than there were 2 years ago.
Oh, that's a great point. In fact, I don't think any of my colleagues have actually made it that the purges are directly tied to our loss with a few hundred votes in that Ohio special election. And there's no justification for these purges. I mean, just because someone doesn't vote in an election or two, it doesn't hurt the Secretary of State to keep them on the rolls. And it's your right. I hope people vote in every election. I certainly do. But it's a citizen's right to vote or not to vote. That should have no bearing in whether they're purged from the rolls. And what they're doing is purging voters who are often the lowest income or minorities or may not be fully aware of their rights and exercise those rights. And so they don't want to give people an opportunity to turn these voters out. in Georgia is the same thing. I mean, there are 1 million unregistered African Americans in Georgia. If a quarter of them were to vote, Stacey Abrams would win overwhelmingly, and the Republicans know this. So they had this effort to not just prevent the registration of African Americans, they were going to close polling places in predominantly African American areas. I mean, it would be it's literally a tactic out of the 1960s.
Yeah, and in Florida, Governor Rick Scott oversaw the criminalization of voter registration efforts that was so draconian that the League of Women Voters stopped registering voters for fear of their members going to prison. I mean, it's just absolutely bizarre. We're talking to Congressman Ro Khanna for the hour. He'll be taking your calls. The calls are coming in, sir. Shall we pick up a few?
Sounds great.
Okay, Adam in Temecula, California. You are on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna.
You got it. Yes, sir. Good morning. I have an interesting dilemma, and it's a homework issue that I have here. Now, in 2012, Obama said that if you've got a business, you didn't build it, somebody else made that happen. That was recontextualized, I don't know if that's a word or not, by Romney and conservative groups to make it look like he was just stating outright that you didn't do that yourself. Okay, well, no business is built by one person. It requires other people and mentors and all those people. Meanwhile, the other part of the question is, and I hope I didn't not go too far off here, is that this current president, I don't mention his name, is pro-business. So what I'm asking right now is, can you help me find some sort of resource or something like that, or soundbite that can clarify that this president right now is not really all that pro-business?
Well, Adam, there are two excellent points. I think with President Obama, he's celebrated entrepreneurship. He gets that it takes a lot of individual initiative to build a business. But I think if you ask any business leader, I represent Silicon Valley. If you asked Steve Jobs before he passed away, Steve Jobs, did you build Apple computers just in a vacuum? He would say no. He would say he was the beneficiary of great education. He was in Homestead, a great public school. He would say that he was the beneficiary of an environment, a place which allowed him to put Apple computers as a building. He had great employees, and it was the nation and the community that allowed him to thrive. And if he were born in other parts of the world, he wouldn't have had the same opportunity, even if he had the same genius. And I think that was all President Obama was saying. It was a pretty self-evident point that Mitt Romney distorted. Now, for this president to be claiming to be pro-business, I think is a total farce. And what he is he's pro-investor class and pro-CEO and executives. He's given them a sugar high. He's given them money that they are using for stock buybacks and enriching their compensation. But the reality is that when you look, their whole theory was they were going to cut taxes and somehow business investment hasn't increased any more than it was during the Obama administration. It's not like companies are going out and building new factories, building new plants, hiring more people. What they're doing is just giving their money back in pay raises to the very, very wealthy. So I think this president can claim that he's for the rich, for the investor class, but he has not built America's businesses in places across America.
Yeah, he's certainly not helping America's small and medium-sized businesses as they're being eaten alive by these giant predators. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. It's 18 minutes past the hour. Congressman Khanna is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. You've got an event coming up, too, don't you, Congressman?
I'm sorry?
You have an event coming up tonight?
We're in the district. Yeah, tonight we've got.
Okay, we'll pick that up on the other side of the break. Hang on just a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 18 minutes past the hour. Congressman Khanna's website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be back with your calls for the congressman right after this. And welcome back. Dave in Federal Way, Washington, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hey, Congressman Khanna. I had a question that kind of mirrors the previous callers, but mine's more towards this NAFTA deal that that they're advertising on. I'd say advertising that they're saying on the news right now that we've signed a deal with Mexico, and in the future we're hoping to come to an agreement with Canada again. Does anybody really know what is in this new NAFTA, and is it is it really going to benefit anybody, or are we just going to allow Trump to seize the high ground on everything economic? I mean, are we just going to chalk this up as Trump reinventing everything?
Well, it's a good question. No, we don't know what the details are on NAFTA renegotiation. There were some of us progressive Democrats when the president talked about renegotiation who said, look, we will support renegotiation if it helps workers, if we're going to make sure that you don't just have these international tribunals just settling disputes, that you call for unionization and bargaining rights in Mexico, and you revise NAFTA in a way that's really going to prioritize workers, because NAFTA was a giveaway to multinational corporations and hurt workers both in this. And we have not had any engagement since then with the administration. So if the administration were serious about revising NAFTA in a way that helps workers, they would find Democrats willing to work with them. But I am highly doubtful, given the president's track record, that that's what he's talking about. So he announces these things, but we have to wait to see what the details are.
It is the one area that, for example, Sherrod Brown in Ohio is supportive of Trump's trade efforts. I've interviewed Lighthizer, his trade guy, on a number of occasions on this program over the past 15 years, and he's pretty solid. At what point do we say, okay, maybe Trump can do something right, but that doesn't mean that he still should, that he shouldn't be impeached or something like? How do we? It seems like we should have some integrity around that. I mean, basically, he stole this issue from the Democratic Party.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's when Pramila Jayapal, myself, Mark Pocan had a press conference with Rosa DeLauro about a couple months ago, saying we stand ready to work with the administration on revising NAFTA and prioritizing worker rights. And there are areas where if the president is doing something that's reasonable, we should applaud that. I mean, I did that when the president went to meet Kim Jong-un. I said, he's not perfect. I'd much rather Barack Obama or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren would be negotiating, but I'd rather that we be negotiating than a bloody strike here. And I'm glad that the people renegotiating NAFTA are people who are going to try to prioritize worker rights. So I think that there has to be, for intellectual consistency, support of policies we agree with while still holding him accountable for a tremendous amount of harm he's doing to the country.
Yeah, to say the very least. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls. We'll be right back with more of the Congressman right after this. Congressman Ro Khanna on the line with us. I'm back from Victoria, BC, by the way. We were up there for one of our daughter's wedding and just acquired 2 new grandchildren. It was wonderful. Oh. Victoria was a beautiful town. And thanks to Jefferson Smith for filling in for me 3 days last week. And
congratulations, Tom.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It was just great. And, marvelous time with the family and everything else. You've got an event coming up tonight. I wanted to mention that or ask you to mention it.
Sure. We have an event, a cybersecurity forum this evening, and some really great panelists. One person is a startup leader who has figured out an authentication for fake video and fake recording. I mean, let's say someone took our conversation and distorted it and had you or me saying that we support the president's policies as opposed to opposing some of the president's policies. Well, how do you make sure that you don't have that kind of fake video, fake audio going about the internet, which could create discord, which could create more discord in our democracy? So there's a panelist who's going to be talking about that, talking about how we can. There's the former CTO of Facebook who's going to be talking about what more tech companies need to do to prevent interference in our elections. And then we're going to be talking about cyber hygiene, what every individual can do to make sure they're not hacked and that they don't their privacy isn't compromised.
Cool. Sounds like a fascinating program. Andre in Fort Washington, Maryland, listening on Sirius XM. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hi, gentlemen. Hi, Tom. Congratulations to you. And Tom, you're one of the smartest guys on the radio, believe me. Listen, I had a little small brain shower, as it were. It seems apparent to me that we know that the Republicans suppressed the vote, the Russians helped them do whatever they did. But here's my question about the suppression of the black vote or his minority vote. If you find out that you were purged for no good reason, would that or would that not be justification for some kind of class action lawsuit because you got jerked off of the rolls?
Well, I think it would. I think this is what Tom's point is that this went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has ruled, as I understand it, in a way that is adverse to people's voting rights. I mean, they have said in certain cases you're allowed to purge people from the rolls if they have not voted in a number of elections. And this is just a ploy to disenfranchise minority voters or infrequent voters who tend to be from making less money, a lower socioeconomic class. So what we need is to revise the law and to challenge that law in the Supreme Court and in circuit courts.
Congressman, we just have about 45 seconds to the break. Question about that. The Constitution, I believe, gives the power to regulate elections to the states, or at least it doesn't seize it for the federal government, so the 10th Amendment would defer it to the states. So how do you set national standards without doing it on a state-by-state basis, or is there no way to do it? I mean, you know, historically they've used the Commerce Clause for that sort of thing, anti-discrimination laws and whatnot. But this isn't commerce. Voting is not commercial.
Right. No, I think that the Voting Rights Act is something that we can appeal to, which is grounded in the 14th Amendment and the amendments of giving people equal citizenship. And I think we have to make the argument why some of these policies are disenfranchising and having a disparate impact on minority voters and should be really a Voting Rights Act issue. There
you go. Congressman Ro Khanna, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing California's 17th District, taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of that right after this break.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And you can visit Congressman Khanna's website at khanna.house.gov, Khanna, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Today we're reading from The Death of Truth by Michiko Kakutani. The subtitle is Notes on Falsehood in the Age of Trump. This is from Chapter 1, The Decline and Fall of Reason. In his 1838 Lyceum address, a young Abraham Lincoln spoke to his concern that as memories of the Revolution receded into the past, the nation's liberty was threatened by a disregard for the government's institutions, which protect the civil and religious liberties bequeathed us by the founders. To preserve the rule of law and prevent the rise of a would-be tyrant who might, quote, spring up amongst us, sober reason, quote, cold, calculating, unimpassioned reason would be required. To remain, quote, free to the last, he exhorted his audience, reason must be embraced by the American people, along with, quote, sound morality and, in particular, a reverence for the Constitution and our nation's laws. As Lincoln well knew, the founders of America established the young Republican on the Enlightenment principles of reason, liberty, progress, and religious tolerance. And the constitutional architecture they crafted was based on a rational system of checks and balances to guard against the possibility, and this is amazing, in the words of Alexander Hamilton, quote, of a man unprincipled in private life and bold in his temper, one day arising who might mount the hobby horse of popularity and flatter and fall in with all the nonsense of the zealots of the day in order to embarrass the government and throw things into confusion that he may ride the storm and direct the whirlwind. End of quote from Alexander Hamilton. The system was far from perfect, but it has endured for more than 2 centuries thanks to its resilience and capacity to accommodate essential change. Leaders like Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., and Barack Obama viewed America as a work in progress, a country in the process of perfecting itself. And they tried to speed that work, mindful, in the words of Dr. King, that progress is neither automatic nor inevitable, but requiring of continuous dedication and struggle. What had been achieved since the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement was a reminder of all the work yet to be done, but also a testament to President Obama's faith that Americans, quote, can constantly remake ourselves to fit our larger dreams, end quote, and the Enlightenment faith in what George Washington called, quote, the great experiment thrust and trusted to the hands of the American people. Alongside this optimistic vision of America as a nation that could become a shining city upon a hill, there's also been a dark, irrational counter-theme in U.S. history, which has now reasserted itself with a vengeance, to the point where reason not only is being undermined, but seems to have been tossed out the window, along with facts, informed debate, and deliberative policymaking. Science is under attack, and so is expertise of every sort, be it expertise in foreign policy, national security, economics, or education. Philip Roth called this counter-narrative the indigenous American berserk, and the historian Richard Hofstadter famously described it as the paranoid style, an outlook animated by heated exaggeration, suspiciousness, and conspiratorial fantasy, his words, Hofstadter's, and focused on perceived threats to, quote, a nation, a culture, and a way of life. Hofstadter's 1964 essay was spurred by Barry Goldwater's campaign and the right-wing movement around it, just as his 1963 book, Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, was conceived in response to Senator Joe McCarthy's notorious witch hunts and the larger political and social backdrop of the 1950s. Goldwater lost his presidential bid, and McCarthyism burned itself out after a lawyer for the U.S. Army, Joseph Welch, had the courage to stand up to McCarthy. Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last? Welch asked. Have you left no sense of decency? The venomous McCarthy, who hurled accusations of disloyalty against Washington, quote, the State Department harbors a nest of communists and communist sympathizers, he warned President Truman in 1950, was rebuked by the Senate in 1954, and with the Soviets' launch of Sputnik in 1957, the menacing anti-rationalism of the day began to recede, giving way to the space race and a concerted effort to improve the nation's science programs. Hofstadter observed that the paranoid style tends to occur in episodic waves. The anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant Know-Nothing Party reached its height in 1855, with 43 members of Congress openly avowing their allegiance. Its power quickly began to dissipate the following year, after the party split along sectional lines, excuse me, though the intolerance it embodied would remain like a virus in the political system, waiting to reemerge. In the case of the modern right wing, Hofstadter argued that it tended to be mobilized by a sense of grievance and dispossession. Quote, America has been largely taken away from them, he wrote, and they may feel that they have no access to political bargaining or the making of decisions, end quote. In the case of millennial era America and much of Western Europe too, these were grievances exacerbated by changing demographics and changing social mores that had made some members of the white working class feel increasingly marginalized by growing income inequalities accelerated by the financial crisis of 2008 and by forces like globalization and technology that were stealing manufacturing jobs and injecting daily life with a new uncertainty and angst. Trump and nationalist anti-immigrant leaders on the right in Europe, like Marine Le Pen in France, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, and Matteo Salvini in Italy, would inflame these feelings of fear and anger and disenfranchisement, offering scapegoats instead of solutions. while liberals and conservatives worried about the rise of nativism and the politics of prejudice, warning that democratic institutions were coming under growing.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna on the line with us, taking your calls for the hour. He represents the 17th District of California. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And Congressman Khanna, let's see, Daryl in Denville, New Jersey is on the line, listening on Sirius XM. Daryl, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Congressman. How are you?
Good.
Yeah. Okay. So I have two comments. One is I'm a software engineer, and so I get really annoyed when I hear people talk about the fact that Obama said that you didn't build this. Look, without publicly funded CERN, there would be no HTTP, there would be no web servers, there would be no search engine if it wasn't for Archie, developed in McGill University. There would be no internet if there was no DARPA, publicly funded. You mentioned Apple. Apple wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for Xerox PARC. I mean, all of these, it doesn't matter what kind of business you have. You're probably using some technology that was built on the backs, on the shoulders of publicly funded research somewhere along the line. And so, the fact that people don't understand that really annoys me. That's the first thing. The second thing I want to say is when Hillary Clinton mentioned that Donald Trump was temperamentally unfit to be president, I think she was talking about his extreme narcissism. And when you look at how he's reacted to John McCain's passing, what you see is somebody who has suffered narcissistic injury. It really bothers him that John McCain gets this praise. John McCain's courage bothers him because he sees that all the imperfections in himself and in his own life. I think this guy he needs a therapist, seriously, and it's dangerous to have somebody like that as president of the United States.
Congressman,
I agree with both your points. I think your first point was very eloquent, and you're absolutely right. Our investments in DARPA, our investments in the Xerox lab, our investments in the National Institute of Health for things in medicine have created so much of the technology that has allowed for the success of many of these tech companies. And I think anyone in Silicon Valley or in technology would acknowledge that point. And it's sad that we don't understand that because it has implications for the future. The thing we should be doing is funding the public research in science and technology that allowed for this success, and we're cutting that, instead giving what I said was sugar highs to the investor class. And that's not, forget income inequality, it's not doing anything for that. It's not helping us build the economic foundation for future success. And I agree with your assessment of the president. I mean, there is something very, very odd, unusual, and dysfunctional about his personality, that he is not able to acknowledge the success or recognize the contributions of another person.
Yeah. Joe in Twin Cities, Minnesota, listening on our blowtorch station there, AM 950, Minnesota's Progressive Talk. Joe, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for taking my call. Congressman, I've got a question. I know it's going to be an extreme one, but I still like to ask it anyway. If it is determined that our president is being influenced under the Russian government, do we have to live with all his judicial choices for the lifetime of those individuals?
Well, you mean if he is impeached, or if it turns out that there's smoking evidence that there was Russian control over him? I think we could argue for new judges. We could argue for expanding the judiciary, but it'd be very difficult to remove judges unless there was grounds for impeachment. I guess you could make a case that they were all illegitimate and try to impeach. I think a more realistic scenario would be to try to expand the judiciary to dilute the influence of these judges.
Rob in Melbourne, Florida, watching us on Facebook Live. Rob, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman. This is in line with the recent questions about the balance of the courts and gerrymandering, voter suppression, and so forth. It seems obvious, to me at least, from the outside perspective, that the Republicans or conservatives or whatever you want to call it are not going to stop until they've absolutely neutered the Democrat, moderate, or liberal opportunities to be involved in governing or voting. What does that look like with total party control by Republicans or ultra-right-wing conservatives in the country? Please.
Well, you're right. I mean, they understand, the Republicans, that the demographics of this country are moving against them. They understand that the popular sentiment for policies is against them, that people want Medicare for all, people want net neutrality, people want policies that have the Dreamers get citizenship. People want to tackle climate change. These have broad, overwhelming majority support. So their theory is, well, the way we hold on to power is we make it very, very difficult for people to vote, and we make districts as uncompetitive as possible. And the only, as it is, I read somewhere that the majority of the Senate is only going to represent 18% of the population of this country. So they're relying on counter-majoritarian institutions and tactics to hold on to an agenda that they know is not popular with the majority. The only solution to that is for us to mobilize twice as hard to try to win, like we hopefully will, the House, despite extraordinarily steep odds and rigged maps, and then focus in 2020 on the redistricting fights so that the next decade we have a better terrain.
Mark in San Jose, California. Watch us on Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. And, Ro, I've got some ideas here. The billionaires seizing their property, liquidating assets, their accounts in foreign domestic, because this is a, bank fraud and tax fraud like the Mafia, and I heard Casino was a good movie, and then directing that to programs like green energy or even health care for CHIP and homeless veterans. I was wondering about that, and thank you for taking my call, Ro.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I agree with you that the taxes going offshore and not being taxed is a huge loophole, and that we ought to be taxing that money of offshore profits and spending it on the homeless population or on our veterans. I was on the veterans issue just very briefly. I was at a town hall where veterans who served in Afghanistan and Iraq came to me and said that the VA had denied their disability claims because their injury was not from being shot at or from combat. They had claimed injuries which were very, very legitimate for having to fly fighter jets, and their backs had given out. And our VA doesn't consider those injuries because they didn't have medical records. So, I mean, we're not prioritizing the spending on things like that we should, people who've risked their lives in combat to provide them with the decent benefits they've earned. And we're allowing these corporations not to pay taxes on their overseas earnings and to bring them back without any tax. That was the entire Trump tax bill.
Lou in East Chicago, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Lou.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm one of the poor Republicans. I was a Democrat for all my life until just when I started watching Trump on there, and I kind of like him because, he stands up for people. I see a lot of these guys like the mayor over here. They're all afraid to stand up for the people. They're all afraid to say, hey, they love America. They let the people kneel and all that up for the national anthem. I'm a veteran. And I was in the Navy. I was on an aircraft carrier in Vietnam, and I have no problem with the VA really because the only service injuries I have is I got a couple of cuts on my head and crap like that. But I have no problem with them. But the thing that gets me is everybody's always saying how big a liar he is, and everybody I ask what did he lie about? I don't understand that part. And they can't answer me back. It's like they all have the same mind. Everybody has the same idea, and they're passing it around instead of, really confronting it with it. And I'm glad that Hillary Clinton didn't get it, because now there's stuff surfacing about the child abuse and all that kind of thing. And I know why
Lou, we're wandering all over the place. What's your specific question for Congressman Khanna?
Oh, okay. Well, when you said President Trump didn't give enough respect to McCain, I know that's bad, and I know he died, and we should give him respect. He was in the service, but he was called Songbird, and the reason he was called that is because he made all of these tapes for the North Koreans.
Okay, Lou. Congressman,
well,
your
don't
thoughts?
cut me off yet. And he got special treatment because of his father, and that the shield is.
Lou, I am going to cut you off there.
Lou,
This is go ahead, Congressman.
Let me just say, look, Lou, I respect your service to our country. I respect your point of view as a citizen. But first of all, on John McCain, none of us have, or the vast majority of us have never been held as prisoners of war. And I think we can all agree as Americans that we should totally respect and honor John McCain's courage and sacrifice and not denigrate that. I mean, there have got to be some things beyond politics. In terms of what the president has done, when you say, why are people saying he lied? I think when he ran, he said, look, I'm going to stand up for the forgotten Americans. I'm going to stand up and bring jobs to places that have been left behind. I'm going to cut the prescription costs and take on the pharmaceuticals. And I just haven't seen him do any of that. The prescription drug costs are just as high. He hasn't done anything in taking on the pharmaceuticals. The jobs that he talked about in places in Kentucky and Ohio and West Virginia, they aren't opening up plants there. They're not. He hasn't done things for the education or helping the middle class. What he's done is given a lot of tax breaks to people on Wall Street, but he hasn't followed through on his campaign promises that he made to people who were struggling.
Yeah, and he also said that he was, unlike all the other Republicans, he was going to protect Medicare and Social Security, and they're actively whacking both. And he said that his replacement for Obamacare would be cheaper and better, and it's more expensive and worse, et cetera.
Absolutely.
Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Khanna.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep, R-E-P, Ro, R-O, Khanna, K-H-A-N-N-A. We'll be right back with more of your questions for Congressman Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. Back with more of Congressman Ro Khanna right after this. And welcome back. And let's see here. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good day, Tom, and then good day to Congressman O'Connor. My question to you, it takes 17 congressmen to impeach Trump. Is there anything we can do to appeal to the American conscience of these 17 congressmen? I know most of them probably a member of the Freedom Caucus, which is owned by the Koch brothers. But is there anything we can do to appeal to the American conscience?
In terms of getting people to vote for holding Trump accountable, is that?
I think he's talking about the number of Republicans who would be necessary to cross over and join with all the Democrats.
Got it. Well, look, I think we have to first wait for Mueller's report, and I assume Mueller's report is going to have a lot of evidence of crimes. And then we need to make the case to the American public that this president has violated the laws, that he's committed crimes, that if I were to do those things, I would be out of a job in my district wouldn't have me. Any person, if they committed crimes, and if Thom Hartmann committed crimes, I doubt they'd still let him have a radio program, and we're a nation of laws. So why should there be any special exemption for any president if they've committed crimes? And I think that argument hopefully there'll be enough decent Republicans who will realize that they're undermining our basic principle that we're a nation of laws, not a nation of individuals.
Bob, watching on YouTube in Raleigh, North Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna.
Congressman and Tom, thank you for a fascinating conversation. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and go to a question regarding Fukushima. Tom, I know you've been tracking this. Congressman, I just was wondering what has been going on there. I know that the Japanese changed the law so that getting information out of there has been very difficult, but I do know that there have been impacts. I mean, certainly from the crew of the USS Ronald Reagan when they steamed through the fallout. But I was wondering if you knew anything about that, or if you didn't, how could we track that? Because the last time I heard, and I'll listen to your answers off the air, there was still somewhere they were hoping maybe in 30 to 40 years of some kind of containment. So I'm open to what you two have to offer.
And is the radiation showing up in California?
Tom, do you want to take that? I have not followed that issue closely.
We've had, there's a group called Beyond Nuclear, beyondnuclear.org, that has been all over this for several years, and we've had them on, every month or so to talk about it. The plumes of radiation from Fukushima have arrived on the U.S. West Coast. We are picking up the cesium signature of a melted reactor in fish that are showing up on the West Coast. Our government says the levels aren't so high we should worry about it. The Japanese government has raised their acceptable levels numerous times, and yeah, they are clamping down on getting information out of Fukushima. It's a real problem for the Abe government right now.
Well, it's interesting. This is why I love coming on your program. It makes me a better member of Congress. So I will look into that and see what we can do in terms of the impact, especially being from California, and have my staff look into that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna right after this. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. And Mike in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello.
You're on the air.
Hello.
My name's Mike. I did 6 months in the stockade for refusing to go to Vietnam. John McCain is not a hero. John McCain was a war criminal. John McCain was shot down in the Operation Rolling Thunder, which was aimed at taking out the civilian infrastructure of North Vietnam. He was shot down trying to bomb a light bulb factory. And in his memoir, he complains that they weren't allowed to shoot even more civilian targets. And if we're going to get rid of this Trump regime, there is no way we're going to do it unless we realize that Trump and McCain agreed on that. Trump had put forward in his campaign that the families of terrorists should be murdered, McCain has never said a word about it. McCain never said nothing about the campaign of destroying the civilians and infrastructure in Yemen. And this is very dangerous to slobber all over John McCain in this kind of atmosphere, because Trump very well may create an international incident, and then everybody's going to fall in line and follow the flag. I didn't follow the flag 40 years ago, and I have no regrets, and I was part of millions of GIs who resisted that unjust war.
Good. Mike, let's get the congressman's comments.
Well, I respect your opposition to the Vietnam War, and obviously it is a war that was wrong and not in our national interest. And I have stood up. I was a very early voice against the Iraq War. I have been opposed to our bombing of Libya. I've said we ought to get out of Afghanistan. I have said we shouldn't have called for regime change in Syria, even as brutal as Assad is. And I have generally been a voice for restraint in foreign policy, including stopping the aid to the Saudis for the bombing in Yemen. I think what we can say with John McCain is he was not the architect of the policies in Vietnam, and he certainly was not in charge of those decisions. He signed up to serve our nation, and he wore the uniform, and at great personal risk and personal sacrifice, he did his duty as someone who was signing up to serve our country. So I think our anger should be for the architects of the Vietnam War, and if they were getting a celebration, then I would oppose that. I certainly wouldn't be for Henry Kissinger lying in state. But when you look at a young person who's willing to dedicate their life in the service of this country and was imprisoned for 5 years, I think that is a heroic act, and that is different from the architects of the policy that have not served the U.S.'s interests.
Congressman, we have just a little less than a minute before we're going to hit the break here. Not enough time really to fairly bring out any more questions for you. So I'm curious, your thoughts in this remaining minute about what we should be paying attention to in the coming weeks, and where we can best focus our activism.
Well, on the policy side, I would say that we're going to have a farm bill come up, and we've really got to fight to make sure that there are not cuts in people's nutrition assistance, in some of the food stamps. I mean, I've had a number of agencies from my district that serve food to so many needy families and to kids concerned about the cuts that may take place. And we need to be vigilant, I think, on some of this foreign policy. I'm going to go back to Congress on Yemen, given the absolute disaster there, and put pressure on the United States to stop the support of the Saudis. On a political level, we've got to make sure that we take back the House, and anything people can do, whether it's writing postcards, knocking on doors, calling folks, we shouldn't underestimate the Republican onslaught. We need to take back this Congress to put some check on the administration's policies.
Amen. Congressman Khanna, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, as always.
My pleasure. We'll be back right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From UN headquarters.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who, pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Thom Hartmann University Book Club today. We're reading from It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America by David K. Johnston. This is from page 61, the chapter titled Forgetting the Forgotten Man. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Labor created a website to honor workers who died on the job. Quote, more than 4,500 workers, lose their lives on the job every year. Below are the names of just a few who have died in recent months. OSHA's mission is to prevent workplace injuries, illnesses, and death, end quote. That Occupational Safety and Health Administration webpage was intended to highlight and humanize workplace deaths, to ensure awareness of tragedies, especially those that could have been avoided, according to Jordan Barab, an Assistant Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration. Barab explained, without information like this, fatality statistics are just raw, sterile numbers. The purpose of adding names and circumstances was to impress people with the tragedy that workers and their families face day after day. In August 2017, Trump's Labor Department quietly removed the preamble and the names when it killed the web page. It also took down, without public announcement, the fatality inspection data for all years prior to 2017. Those were just two of many other Trump administration actions inimical to worker safety. Others included no longer posting press releases about deaths resulting from unsafe working conditions, delaying rules to reduce sickness and death from inhaling silica and beryllium at work, delaying rules to lower the risk of railroad engineers and truck drivers falling asleep at the switch or wheel because of untreated sleep apnea, and the appointment to the Supreme Court of a judge who held that a company had the right to fire a worker who chose not to freeze to death on the job. A reasonable person listening to Donald Trump's inaugural address would never have expected these and other actions, assuming he believed what Trump said. Trump declared, "The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no more. You came by the tens of millions to become part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens," end quote. Those men and women were forgotten again the following week. And it's not just workers whose interests were forgotten, not to mention who were put in danger. By deciding not to implement a rule to reduce the chances of truck drivers and train operators falling asleep at the wheel, Trump put at risk the lives of families driving along the highway, people riding on passenger trains, and many others. The White House called it President Trump's war on regulation. In his weekly radio address in early May, he declared that we've removed one job-killing regulation after another, and they're not pretty, and they're going. And believe me, we're just getting started on regulations. They're gone. Removal of data on workplace deaths, which averaged 13 per day, infuriated Jordan Barab, who was Obama's number 2 at OSHA. As a private citizen, Barab created a web page to keep track of the names of the dead and the reasons they were killed on the job. He called it, "OSHA won't tell you who died in the workplace, we will." After the election, Barab's concerns that the Trump administration would be bad for workers increased when he asked where the Trump beachhead team was and learned that none was coming. Each incoming administrator sends people to scope out federal agencies, learn who does what, and get a feel for the place in advance. Then the incoming administration sends its landing team, the people who will initially implement its policies for each agenda, or at each agency. When no beachhead team came up, Barab figured it meant worker safety simply was not a priority for Trump. He hoped that was the worst of it, nothing more than apathy about worker safety. But when the landing team arrived, Barab realized trouble was coming for American workers, and it was not official apathy, but the start of assaults on workers' rights and safety. Barab said most of them had no idea they were going to labor and no interest in workers' issues either. What they did have was a mandate to delay, repeal, or weaken regulations that protected workers as part of Trump's plan to eliminate, quote, any regulation that is outdated, unnecessary, bad for workers, or contrary to the national interest, end quote. The first sign came when Trump nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch was an acolyte of Antonin Scalia, whose seat he would be taking. Like Scalia, he said statutes should be literally read, and if that made no sense, well, that was a problem for Congress. Also like Scalia, he had a habit of consulting dictionaries, often following Scalia's practice of relying on the third, fourth, or even lesser definition of a word when it supported his jurisprudence. Trump's nomination alarmed unions. Jody Calamine, a communications worker of America lawyer, told Gorsuch's Senate confirmation hearing that Gorsuch, quote, is a threat to working people's health and safety, end quote. Calamine cited Gorsuch's dissent in the 2016 case to make this his point. That dissent, he said, reveals an anti-worker bias and features the judicial activism that will ultimately put workers' lives at risk, end quote. Those are unusually strong words about a Supreme Court nominee, but a review of the case shows Gorsuch has little regard for human life, at least when it comes to employers' power over their workers. He considers a rigid interpretation of the law more important. The case was about a law Congress passed giving workers the right to refuse dangerous tasks. Gorsuch said, no, you may not refuse. It's even worse than you think, by David K. Johnston.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Thomas DeLorenzo. He is professor of economics at Loyola University at the Maryland Salinger School of Business, a senior scholar with the Ludwig von Mises Institute, and author of 6 books, including his latest, The Problem with Socialism. And you can tweet him, I guess, generically at Mises, M-I-S-E-S. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So I've looked through your book, and I'm a little baffled. You're talking about modern Democratic Party progressive policies as socialist, and yes, there are some people who call them that, but those policies are basically in favor of Social Security, Medicare, public roads, public fire departments, public schools. What's your problem with those things?
Well, these things are, generally the worst performing parts of our economy are the ones run by government. Yeah, our country's about
our public roads, our public schools. You want to privatize those? Our fire departments?
Sure. Where is the worst education in America? It's the inner city public schools, the government-run monopoly.
But that's a function of schools being funded by property taxes, which goes back to Reconstruction. This was an effort to keep poor black schools poor, so that they would not produce good students, to prevent economic opportunity. Wouldn't it be better to call for those schools? I mean, public schools in high-income districts are doing just great. They're kicking ass. Wouldn't it be a much more reasonable policy to simply equalize funding of schools all across the country?
Well, there's no link between how much money is spent and educational achievement, and I think anybody with their eyes open
seriously
that a lot of the inner city government schools in cities like Baltimore, where I work, are just awful. And the Ku Klux Klan could not have done more harm to black children in America than the government-run school monopoly in the inner city public schools in places like Baltimore and Chicago.
So your solution is to turn these over to Trump University?
What?
Your solution is to turn these over to Trump University or one of Betsy DeVos's for-profit schools?
No, that's
seriously?
A stupid comment. Of course not. Of course not.
Well, what is your solution?
Solution. A magic bullet. There is no magic bullet.
But of course, competition is preferred to monopoly. And of course, the government-run schools are a monopoly. And monopolies are always bad for most everybody except for the monopolists.
In commerce, I agree with you, but we're talking the education of our children. We're not talking commerce here.
Even worse. It's even worse that because when they fail, you can ruin a child's life and his economic opportunity forever, and which is what we're doing in
so what's your solution?
Government schools. And so we need more competition, including all private schools. And so, the private schools, that's why so many parents are resorting to homeschooling because they don't want to have their kids sitting there in these gun-free zones where all the mass shootings occur.
In those schools with those people, right?
What's that?
In those public schools with those people.
Well, no, I didn't say that. That's you. That's another dumb comment.
Well, Virginia, I mean, after Brown versus Board of Education, for a full year, Virginia shut down the entire state's public schools because they didn't want white kids to have to go to school with black kids.
What does that have to do with anything I'm talking about in my book?
Well, it seems like we're on the edge of the same thing.
Stories.
When you introduce, quote, competition, when you introduce alternatives, what happens is that the wealthy white kids end up in the fancy, more expensive schools, and the poorer black kids end up, by and large, or poorer white kids, if we're talking West Virginia, end up in inferior schools. And whether they're run by government or whether they're run by charter schools. I mean, you find just about the same percentage of underperforming charter schools as you do public schools in the country.
I didn't know you were an educational scholar, but I think
well, I ran a private school for 14 years. I was on the board for 30 years.
Yeah, so you think more educational opportunity is a bad thing for black kids? Is that what you said? That's what you just
What
said.
I'm saying is that we need to stop funding public schools through property taxes so that nice communities, upscale white suburban neighborhoods where you've got high property values and those high property taxes that support education have great schools, and poorer schools have crappy schools. We need to stop that. That was put into place for a very specific reason, and not view the public good as an opportunity for profit. That's what I'm saying. You can call that socialism if you want. You can say it's terrible, but...
Well, you have to confront the fact that there are places like Washington, D.C., where they spend maybe $30,000 a year per student or more in the government schools, and the inner city schools in D.C. are very poor, just like the ones in Baltimore, Chicago, and many
because they're dealing with children who are damaged by the poverty of their parents, and the poverty of their parents is a function of structural racism. I mean, if you want to solve the school problem in Washington, D.C., solve the poverty problem. But again, that's not, turning that over to a for-profit corporation. I don't see how that happens.
Well, of course, that's another big failure of government, isn't it? The poverty programs. We've been spending trillions for, 70, 80, 90 years on that, and we still have a poverty problem.
LBJ cut poverty in half in the United States in 8 years.
You what?
LBJ cut poverty in half in the United States in 8 years. If you look at, I was in Canada over the weekend for the wedding of my daughter, and I was in the capital of British Columbia, Victoria. I didn't see a single street person. I didn't see poor people. I didn't, we traveled all over the place. I'm sure that there are some poor people, but it's a country that has what? The government sector is over 30% in Canada. It's approaching 50% in Northern Europe, and in those countries you don't have the kind of poverty that we have in the United States. Pregnant women in the United States have a higher risk of dying from their pregnancy than in any other developed country in the world. It's right up there with undeveloped countries in Southern Asia and in Africa and in war-torn parts of Central America. That's terrible.
If that's true, I'm not sure about these statistics you're throwing out like that. But it's a good example of the failures of our welfare state, isn't it? And I don't believe for a minute that LBJ cut poverty in half in a few years.
It was 8 years.
Quite miraculous. You should read Charles Murray's old book, Losing Ground, and you show that what he calls latent poverty. That is, people.
You're talking Charles Murray of the bell curve?
People without government assistance actually became worse off. Poverty rate went up after we started.
You're talking Charles Murray, who said that black people were intellectually inferior to white people?
Well, no, I've actually read that book years ago, and he didn't say that. And so your ad hominem comments is not a way to address this issue.
I think Murray and the bell curve have been well discredited, but I still don't hear your solution to. Let's move to Social Security and Medicare. You oppose government socialism. I would grant you that Social Security and Medicare are socialist programs. They run on less than 3% overhead, both of them. If you turn Social Security over to the banks, it's not going to run on 3% overhead. And if you turn Medicare over to the health insurance companies, they're typically running anywhere from 20 to 35% overhead. How is that more efficient?
Well, ask your listeners where they would rather have their money. Would they rather be able to invest it on their own somewhere in the stock market or elsewhere, or would they prefer the 0% return they're going to get if they're under the age of 35 or 40 with Social Security? And that's the bottom line. What is the welfare of Americans who are forced to participate in this program?
So if I'm 25 years old and I've been working since I was 16, and so for 9 years I've been paying into either A, Social Security, or B, into a 401k, and I've got $30,000 in my 401k now, and I'm 25, and I get in a car accident and break my neck. If I'm on Social Security, I have literally an insurance policy against disaster for the rest of my life. Social Security will pay me, Social Security disability income will pay me until the day I die and protect me, provide me with housing, provide me with medical care, and provide me with food. If I've got 25 grand in my 401k, I can live for what, maybe a year or two, and then I starve to death? This is your solution, really?
Well, the average person is not going to get an automobile accident and be disabled for the rest of his life. And in general, we have all kinds of programs to take care of our fellow citizens like that. But in
what
general,
programs?
We're forced to participate in a program that pays us basically less than 1% on our investment at a time when countries around the world are moving in the other direction. England in the late 70s, their system went bankrupted, and they allowed people of a certain age to opt out. Chile did the same thing when their system was bankrupted in the 80s.
When Pinochet did that in Chile, first of all, it took a military coup, and guys from the Mises Institute and the Chicago School of Economics went down and advised him, and the people were so offended when he privatized Social Security that he took thousands of people out and threw them out of helicopters to kill them. Is that what you're recommending?
Yeah, that's what I'm recommending. That's
and Margaret Thatcher. I mean, seriously?
That's ridiculous. Come on.
Well, that was the blowback. I mean, he privatized Social Security. People were out in the streets, and he started killing protesters. Hello? Oh, he just hung up on me. Amazing. Okay, well, we'll take a break, and we'll pick up your calls. That was Professor Thomas De Lorenzo, professor of economics at Loyola University, and the Maryland Selinger School of Business, and the senior scholar at the Ludwig von Mises Institute. And apparently, not able to handle a debate. We'll be back at 17 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Yes, let's bring back the helicopters. There were actually people wearing T-shirts here in Portland, the right-wingers, the Nazis at the last protest, saying, time to do what Pinochet did and start throwing lefties out of helicopters. And welcome back. Is it Girish? Am I saying that right? Or Girish, watching Free Speech TV in San Jose?
Yes, this is Girish. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure. What's up?
Great show.
Thank you.
And where was that professor located? In which state?
I think he said he was in Maryland. So, yeah.
Okay. So the only thing I want to say on the subject of education, Tom, and I dare say you won't agree with me on this, but one of the bigger problems that we face with the level of education, and this is not the only problem by any means, but is the protection of teachers who don't make the grade. I think the unions, unfortunately, have too strong a hold on progressive politics, and we cannot afford to have tenured teachers who just don't serve the children. And somebody has to be able to make that decision, and we should trust our administrators to do that.
In most states, you still have tenure at colleges, but in most states, the power of the teachers' unions to protect bad teachers, which I will give you, has been a problem in some places. I think New York City was one of the places that was the poster child that was held up in the 80s and 90s. In some places that has happened, but in most parts of the country, the ability of a teachers' union to protect a bad teacher is gone.
Yeah, but Tom, the reality is...
The police unions protecting bad cops, that's a whole other thing.
No, see, the reality is that I know a little bit about the teachers, but the thing is that it's very difficult, Tom, to prove. You have to jump through so many hoops that mostly the principals and administrators just say, it's not worth it. And unfortunately, what I'm concerned about...
So what's your solution?
The solution is to remove the tenure system for teachers.
So
if you don't
then,
make the grade, you're out.
My understanding of tenure was that one of the reasons why you want to have it at the college level, and maybe arguably at the high school level, is to provide teachers who may not be, the standard issue normal teachers. They may have unconventional teaching styles or even unconventional opinions, to give them some protection so that our kids are exposed to a wide variety of perspectives. Obviously not to protect incompetence. I don't think anybody can defend that.
I agree that's not the intent, but with many good policies, the intent sometimes defeats the reality on the ground. And all I'm saying is that the unions, we don't want what's happened in Wisconsin to happen in places like California. The unions need to wake up and become more aware of their role in not just protecting the teachers, but also protecting the children. Ultimately,
I think they're there.
The education of the children has to be the primary goal.
I think by and large the teachers' unions are there. I mean, and most state laws have basically gutted the ability of teachers' unions, specifically teachers' unions, to protect bad teachers. But shouldn't teachers have the right to unionize? Or you're focusing your ire not on the union, but on tenure?
I'm absolutely in favor of unions. I wasn't when I was a young man, but after I moved to the United States, I realized the importance of unions. But when they get too powerful, look at what happened in the auto plants. They just got too powerful. They were negotiating deals that were not sustainable in the ultimate economic model.
Yeah, I would debate that.
I'm just saying it's a fair debate.
But that's another topic.
The reality is that unions have to learn how to understand that they don't want to kill the goose.
Okay, I got it. Girish, thanks for the call, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Hey, Thom Hartmann here. Here's what... Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Of Anything Goes summer too, so a lot in the news. I've a couple of stories I want to bring up with you, and FYI, we can certainly continue the conversation about socialism versus libertarianism if you would like, but Professor what's his name, Professor De Lorenzo is no longer with us, so let's not pick on him while he's not present to defend himself. The nation's top student loan official, a fellow by the name of Thom Hartmann, has just resigned from the Trump administration. This is the highest level departure from the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. This is the guy who is supposed to, his job is to oversee the $1.5 trillion student loan market. And he says that the reason why he's quitting that job is the White House's open hostility toward protecting our nation's millions of student loan borrowers. Mick Mulvaney is now running the CFPB. He downgraded the mission of Froman's Student Loan Office and moved it from into consumer education instead of enforcement. Basically completely defanged the department. This is bizarre. Voting scams. We've got a Republican Congressman, Scott Taylor in Virginia, who has had a bunch of people on his staff now accused of forging dead voters' signatures and the others forging signatures of live voters as well on petitions in order to get an independent candidate on the ballot. Who's the independent candidate? Well, it's the woman who ran against the current Democratic Party's candidate in the primary. So, you know, he wants to get 2 Democrats on the ballot to go up against him. So, you know, to split the vote. And he's hired vote hustlers, and they're doing this is amazing. An amazing piece over in Canada. This is the Sunday Morning Herald, I believe it's called, or the Sydney Morning, whatever it is, smh.com is the website. I'm sorry, I don't have the name of the paper right in front of me, but I've got the article. And this is titled "Cancer Eating the Heart of Australian Democracy." And they're talking about how he writes, since 2010, Australian politics has become vicious, toxic, and unstable. But why? He says there's a unique negativity, toxicity, and hatred that one man has brought to our national political life over the past decade. Who is that one man? He says Rupert Murdoch, the greatest cancer on Australian democracy. Murdoch is not just a news organization, he writes. Murdoch operates as a political party acting in pursuit of clearly defined commercial interests in addition to his far-right ideological worldview. He says in Britain, Murdoch made Brexit possible because of the position taken by his newspapers. In the United States, Murdoch's Fox News is the political echo chamber of the far right, which enabled the Tea Party and the Trump Party to stage a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. In Australia, as in America, Murdoch has campaigned for decades to support tax cuts for the wealthy, killing action on climate change, and destroying anything approximating multiculturalism. And then he adds, what's unique about Australia is that Murdoch owns 2/3 of Australia's print media. No other democracy has anything approaching his effective media monopoly. And Murdoch is apparently using that media monopoly to just, you know, wreak havoc on the political systems in Australia, much as he's doing in the United States with Fox so-called News and the Wall Street Journal. We flew United Airlines over the weekend, and we stopped in the United Club in San Francisco. And they used to have paper racks that had USA Today and the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the San Francisco Chronicle. And now all that they had, and we were in 2 different United Clubs, all that they, actually 3, the one in Portland as well, all they had was the Wall Street Journal. Murdoch is pushing this stuff out the same way he pushes out Fox News as free basic cable.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The guy is basically consolidating his control over the minds of Americans, much as he did Australians and Brits. It's terrible. We're reading today from Republican strategist Rick Wilson's new book, Everything Trump Touches Dies. Chapter 1, Vichy Republicans. Some say Donald Trump is the price this nation is paying for too many years of partisan bickering and division. Some say America's forgotten working men rose up in a single inchoate scream of rage at a system that for too long provided them with nothing but empty promises, bad trade deals, and government-subsidized carbs. Some claim it's from a generation weaned on talk radio, Fox News, and the comments sections of a million Tea Party websites. Some say it's a sign of a merciless God testing us to the breaking point. I still think that it's because we didn't let that old gypsy woman vote when she produced a photo ID back in 2012. All those reasons fall short of the mark, though, don't they? By now, it should be clear that Trump's election was a sign of the coming apocalypse, soon to be followed by a rain of blood, 7 years of darkness, and a plague of frogs. That may be exaggerating slightly, but we do have a plague of peppies, the cartoon frog meme that is a favorite symbol of Trump's alt-right fan base. And there's an odds-on chance that our grandchildren will hear this tale while hunched over guttering fires in the ruins of a radioactive Mad Max-style hellscape. The Trumpian heroic narrative is simple. Powerful alpha male warrior descends golden escalator. Forgotten Americans rise, don red helmets. Evil sorceress Hillary is defeated in single combat. Great feasting and rejoicing by the unwashed masses follows. Swamp is drained and all live MAGA ever after. The truth is, as you might imagine, more prosaic, more horrible, and more human. The mythology of Donald Trump's rise to the Oval Office is rich in Trump-aggrandizing explanations that ignore the enablers, normalizers, media fellators, ideological arsonists, and moral ciphers who make up Washington's and New York's political and media culture. They're the proximate reasons Trump was able to overcome the field of almost a dozen serious Republicans and Ben Carson. No, MAGA hat fans, you didn't simply rise in your mighty millions and elect the Donald all by your deplorable selves. You had help, much of it from the very elites you so revile. Revile means hate. Sorry, I know you're in an oxy stupor much of the time, so I'll try to move slowly and not use big words. Yes, Trump's election shocked the world, but the forces, conditions, and players who enabled and empowered Trump's rise to the Republican nomination and the presidency have been with us all along. They're perfectly explicable, if honestly embarrassing, to the world's longest-running democracy. For all the Trump voters claim to hate the swamp and the coastal elites who populate it, they owe the reptile American population a note of thanks. They hated New York, D.C., and media elites helped Trump more than they'll admit. Excuse me, the hated. I'll leave Russia's role in the 2016 campaign to the many outstanding books on the topic and to that Mueller fellow. It was the cable networks, and no, not just Fox, the elite media, inert major donors, a moneyed horde of lobbyists, and the professional conservative activists who ditched principle for revenue, clicks, ratings, and transitory influence. They enabled, empowered, and elected Trump, and continue to do so with their rolling coverage of his every presidential distraction strategy. Without a particular confluence of their attention, resources, and focus, the Trump clown show would have been like every other kooky email chain forwarded by your mom, or the contents of those narrow-gauge but high-crave Facebook groups like Tea Party's Patriots against the Soros moon base. I know you're about to search Facebook for that. The question isn't whether it's a real group. The telling factor is that in this era, you think it could be. The swamp played its roles and does to this day. Washington's culture is nothing if not resilient, adaptable, and resistant to change. I lived in it for years and watched it grind down the most idealistic people into the venal, smug, insular elites among America loves to loathe. Washington is the drug-resistant syphilis of political climates, largely impervious to treatment and highly contagious. Donald Trump may have infected Washington with his own nationalist STD, but Washington returned the favor. In early 2015, the political class of lobbyists, staffers, associations, think tanks, and the rest of the Washington ecosystem viewed Donald Trump as a political impossibility. He was the vulgar clown, prancing and bellowing on the national stage, but never for a moment someone they could take seriously. The old order money like Jeb Bush, the optimists like Marco Rubio, the purists like Ted Cruz, the 348 GOP candidates on the campaign trail, on the early debate stages, in the political scrum that was the 2016 GOP primary, were almost all experienced, successful, and well-staffed. They were, by and large, serious people. It was the quality of that divided field that let the political version of Gresham's Law sweep Trump into a position where Washington and national Republicans made the most consequential and destructive compromises in modern political history. As the election progressed, it took an array of insiders from the GOP and conservative movement to legitimize and normalize Trump for the Republican base voter beyond the howling edge of the Fox viewership. These men and women were Vichy Republicans, eager to shred their principles for a chance to touch the fringe of Trump's golden wig, eager to bask in the celebrity glow of his spray tan. Some V-Chief Hall of Famers aren't people you might directly associate with the old guard. Locust Valley, lockjaw Republican elite. No, oh, no indeed. Many were the purity of the purity posse, purest of the purity posse. You know, that we rather have a pure minority than a squishy majority types. These were conservative stalwarts. Anyhow, it's Rick Wilson's book, Everything Trump Touches Dies. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Terry in Rochester, Washington. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom. There's three types of voters now. I'm going to be in the third one. There's the ones that watch Fox News, and they basically have the same line. You know, it doesn't matter if you talk to them on one end of the nation or another. The verbiage that comes out is basically the same. You know, they've been hypnotized. And then there's the ones, I guess I'd put you in there, that say, well, let's vote again. Let's get what we can get Democrats, which I kind of agree with, you know, as a kind of a stopgap. Then there's a third kind like me that sees none of these guys that are in politics, when they do get caught breaking the law, when they do murder whole nations by declaring a war based on lies, none of them ever go to jail. None of them ever get tried. I mean, I've been tried for marijuana 5 or 6 times. I'm 73, facing 20 years in jail. I don't kill people. I don't murder whole nations. You know, we're just sick of the whole thing. We're sick of the whole thing where the peasantry is constantly attacked by the rich. And people are going, well, you know, they're whitewashing it here, whitewashing it there, and most of them don't know they're being attacked. Some of us are a little bit more intuitive than that. So that's basically my position.
Yeah, I think, you know, people like Congressman Ro Khanna, who was on earlier, and basically the entire Progressive Caucus that he's the vice chair of, are taking these positions that, no, we never should have invaded Iraq. I don't know their position on Afghanistan, but my position is we never should have invaded Afghanistan. You know, particularly after Mullah Omar came out and said that he was perfectly willing to arrest bin Laden and hand him over to us, or hand him over to a third country. George Bush said, no thanks, don't want to do that. Excuse me, but you know, this idea of jumping into every conflict. We shouldn't have bombed Libya. I mean, we just created a nightmare for Europe by bombing Libya, and frankly for Libya, you know, and for the rest of Africa, that part of Africa. And yeah, I agree. But there are some good politicians, Terry.
Every bomb they drop, who's making the money on it, and who's suffering from it?
The defense contractors.
Let's puzzle together a little better than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who is ordering these wars? Who is?
Politicians who take big campaign contributions from defense contractors. It's real simple.
You know, it comes back to Citizens United. They're just turning the screws the final 3 quarters here.
I agree, and that's why, Terry, excuse me, it is so important that we make sure that we're registered to vote, and that we do vote, and that we in particular look for members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and do everything we can to help people like that get into political office, because there are some good politicians out there. There actually are. Alex in Miami. Hey, Alex, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Warren. Yeah, I'm a Democrat, but I don't consider myself a progressive in a way. I'm kind of center right.
What does that mean?
Center left on others. And
Alex, what does that mean?
Huh?
Well, I don't get it. You know, pick some, you know, some of the issues that are basically, you know, generally considered progressive issues, and you know, tell me what is the middle of the road issue on, say, Social Security? What does a moderate say about, you know, progressives say Social Security should be strengthened. What do moderates say about Social Security?
Well, a moderate Democrat would agree.
Okay.
It should be strengthened.
And progressives say Medicare should be strengthened and should be available to everybody in the country. What would a moderate say?
Same way, and I don't disagree with that. But
okay, well, what are the, you know, I could go through a long list here, but, you know, we do these one at a time. It's going to take forever. But what What I don't get it. I don't get how anybody.
Okay, I'll let you know. There was an article in Bloomberg the other day about Donald Trump. He was boasting about the Camaro in the United States. It's $100 and something thousand in China. And Bloomberg kind of wrote an article, and they said, well, he's wrong. It's not really 115. It's about 50. But this is exactly what the progressives don't do. They don't jump on that opportunity to attack Trump and protecting American workers in respect to that issue, the air conditioning company, a Carrier, and many examples like that. They've kind of failed in trying and let Trump hijack the American worker.
A number of Democratic politicians have spoken out on all those issues. It's just that they don't get press. If you don't want to talk about Russia or talk about Donald Trump, basically you can't get on national media if you're a Democrat.
Well, and also there's Senator Webb when he ran with during when Hillary and
Jim Webb of Virginia, isn't he?
Yeah. Yes. Now he's kind of a center of the road. Maybe you could call him close to blue dog, a Democrat or whatever. But from a party perspective, they kind of shunned him away. Like, this guy, he doesn't have a chance. He has no value. Basically, pushed to the side and had to resign right away. Kind of like they kind of got.
Well, this is increasingly what is happening, Alex, to Democrats who call themselves middle of the road as an excuse for basically taking money from big corporations and billionaires. I mean, it seems to me like that's the one thing that if you wanted to say, hey, I'm a middle-of-the-road Democrat, and I said, what does that mean? If you were speaking truthfully, you would say, well, I want to protect certain industries that give me money.
Well, I'll give you another example where maybe middle of the road goes in religion, and there's a lot of African Americans and Latino voters where I work who did not vote. They didn't like Trump, they didn't like Hillary, and they couldn't vote the Democratic ticket because of religious reasons. And this is where I think the Democratic Party.
What are you talking about?
Reach out. It doesn't reach out to certain values that maybe the perception of the right.
Alex, I'm sorry. No, that makes no sense. Bill in Nevada. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I've listened to you, talk to these libertarians, debate these libertarians. The one thing that I think you should throw at them when you debate these people is there's nothing more socialistic in our government than the military.
Yeah, absolutely. And the VA is classic socialized medicine. Although, again, you get Republican administrations that constantly cut funding for the VA, or in the case of George W. Bush, didn't increase funding in anticipation of war wounded coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And then they stand around going, oh, we got problems with the VA. We need to privatize it. So, but but you're right. That is the most socialist institution in government. Spot on. Thanks a lot for the call. Gina in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Gina, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to bring up quickly what's going on actually across the bridge in Vancouver, Washington. Are you familiar with a lot of the local school districts, teachers' unions voting to strike?
No, I was completely unaware of it. Tell me about it.
Well, I don't blame you because it hasn't really been getting much coverage apart from our local media outlets and like our newspaper. But basically, there was a decision. It's called the McCleary decision, which was a lawsuit against the state legislature, and it was against basically about saying it failed to meet the state constitutional duty to make ample provisions for the education of all children within its borders. So based on that, there have been these negotiations with the teachers' unions and the districts who have not been in compliance with the money earmarked for pay raises and for education and everything like that. All the local districts, the teachers' unions, have voted to strike. In my district, the biggest one in Clark County is Evergreen School District, and our school board just passed a resolution that would allow our superintendent to halt paying our medical insurance premiums while we're on strike. So we're supposed to start school tomorrow. Yeah, that was reported in the Columbian.
So let me get this straight. Here's the sequence of events. Somebody sues the government of Washington State, saying you're not appropriately funding public education because the state constitution says every child should have access to a good education, and you're not doing that. The court agreed with that and said, Washington State, you've got to start paying more for your schools and funding these things up to snuff. The teachers, many of the individual school districts are saying, cool, we'll take more money, but we're not going to share it with the teachers. And the teachers are saying, hey, wait a minute, we're underpaid to begin with, and we're going to go on strike. And now the superintendent of schools in your area or county, if you're going to have to remind me what the details of what you said that basically if you guys go on strike, he's going to stop paying for your health insurance. Is that the sequence?
Yeah, you said it more beautifully than I could. I apologize. I'm nervous.
No, that's great. But that's nuts.
Yeah, so it's Evergreen School District. It's the largest one in Clark County.
Right. Clark County is where Vancouver, Washington is.
Yeah. So it encompasses, Camas School District, Vancouver School District, which is more on the west side, and Evergreen School District, which has about 27,000 enrolled students. Our superintendent, Dr. John Steach, he was given, basically the school board passed a resolution that would allow him not only to take the union support, but to halt paying insurance premiums should we be on strike.
Has he indicated that he's going to do that?
He's had it on the table. We'll have to see. We're negotiating today. We're supposed to start tomorrow, but
Amazing.
It doesn't look
Gina,
like it.
I got to run. We're hitting a break here, but I'm completely supportive of you. I wish you the best. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Speaking of why teachers should have unions, and those unions should have some protections, we'll be back with more of your calls. Well, actually, we're going to check in with Talk Media News in just a minute. Stick around. And welcome back. Les, watching Free Speech TV in Tooele, Washington. Hey, Les, what's up?
Hello.
Hey, what's on your mind?
I was calling in about the fellow that was talking about privatizing Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to mention that I talked to you a while back. I worked at Power Line, and I broke my back when I was 21.
Mm-hmm.
And the state of Utah didn't do anything for me. In fact, the company was out of Maine, and they used the state of Utah, so they denied me. So I got like $1,200 for being off work and having a broken back and having several surgeries. And then in 1990, it happened again. I tore my rotator cuff, and I had to go to LNI. And they wouldn't do my claim. I had to get Randy Tate at the time, the congressman, to go down there and do something.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, it's weird. I couldn't do it on my own, but a politician had to go down there and tell them to stop, denying my claim and process my claim. I had just bought my house at the time. I had 3 children and a wife. So, now I'm on Social Security, and if it wasn't for being able to work those years and having Social Security now and being disabled and having all the problems I have, I don't know where I would be, because I could not afford to put money away for that many years to have what I have today because of all of my injuries and every time I had to start over. So he doesn't really understand.
No, he doesn't. And the point that typically these guys who want to privatize Social Security, the whole Pete Peterson crowd, the von Mises crowd, the Chicago school guys, the so-called libertarians, and the Ayn Rand objectivists, the point that all of them miss with regard to Social Security is that it is not a retirement program, it's an insurance program. It's insurance against disaster anytime in your life, and it's insurance against poverty and old age. It is an insurance program, and as an insurance program, it works exactly the way it was designed. You distribute the occasional very, very high risk. I pointed out the example of my friend Michael Hutchison, who fell. I didn't name him, in that segment, but he was one of my closest friends. He fell, he broke his neck, and he was paralyzed from the neck down for the next roughly 20 years until he died a year or two ago. And Social Security kept him alive and provided him with a nurse and provided him with a place to live and fed him. And I mean, it was extraordinary what Social Security did. I mean, he was living a very poor life in kind of a ratty apartment, but he was there. He wasn't living on the streets. And that's how insurance is supposed to work. You have some people who, like yourself and my friend Michael, who are probably using more of those resources. And then a lot of us use none of them. We are not disabled during, before we get 65. And then once we turn 65 or 66, I guess, or 67 now it's going to be, thanks to Ronald Reagan's changes to Social Security, we can get, quote, retirement. But it's really not retirement. It's insurance against old age poverty.
And I can't live on it. I literally can't live on it.
Yeah.
I go to the food bank. I volunteer at the food bank, and I get food at the food bank because I can't live on this.
Yeah, and you could have, by the way, 40 years ago. I mean, the Social Security has not kept up with inflation. It has not been indexed to the things that are meaningful to people on Social Security. We need to change that. And disability as well. Les, I'm sorry we're hitting a break, but your points were really, really well made. Thanks so much for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be back. We're going to check in with Bob Ney on Talk Media News in just a moment. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheold.com and Loving What You Do. And on Hybrid 2 here on the line with us is Bob Ney, the author of Sideswiped, former congressman from Ohio. Congressman, welcome back.
Hey, thank you, Tom.
So what's at the top of your list for the news today?
Well, we have kind of breaking news, which we can't figure out what's involved in it, to be honest with you completely. But President Trump is announcing that he's got a deal with Mexico for the North American Free Trade Agreement, of course, that he wanted to revisit.
Mm-hmm.
But, of course, Canada still has to sign off. That everybody talks about Mexico, but that's a pact, as you know.
Right.
So it will take Canada.
Unless he's creating a simple bilateral, treaty or deal or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, he could do a separate one, but this one looks like he's kind of taunting Canada. So I know they're going to have to try to get Canada because he took a jab at the government of Canada. And he said, if they'd like to negotiate fairly, and the easiest thing we can do is tariff their cars coming in and retaliate for its import fees on dairy products. So
I was in Canada last week for my daughter's wedding, and it was. In fact, she married a French-Canadian. Half the family spoke mostly French. It was fascinating. In fact, the wedding ceremony was in English and in French. But in any case, I can tell you the Canadians do not like Donald Trump. I mean, they're just like, it's like shock and horror. It's like, they're just, we can't believe you guys did that. But anyhow, back to you, Bob.
So, you know how the president is. We have no idea what's really in this, and we won't for a while. And then I did want to mention a study. Well, I shouldn't say study, an investigation, and it's pretty impressive. It's by the Virginian Pilot and Marquette University, and it's about how we started, of course, shutting down large institutional mental health hospitals in the 1960s. And, they had become infamous at that time, of course, for subpar treatment, et cetera. But that actually didn't stop the institutionalization of people with mental illness. We just started doing it in jails and prisons.
You're right.
So nearly and I know because I was incarcerated, and there were a ton of people that had a form of mental illness, and they were receiving no treatment for it.
It's supposed to be about half of the entire jail population in the United States is diagnosably mentally ill and not being treated. That's mind-boggling.
Yes, and then they put them in the hole, as we called it, also lovingly known as the Red Roof Inn because it had a red roof, and it's solitary. And that strikes fear, including myself, because I was threatened once for they didn't turn the switch on, and I got up, and then they threatened to put me in there for doing that. And and it strikes fear in you because it's basically complete isolation. And they put people in there that have a form of mental illness, and some people have died.
Yeah.
So
or they come out just totally psychotic. It just breaks them.
And it's irreversible.
Yeah, it's classified as torture by the UN. Most of the developed countries in the world do not use solitary confinement, except in very, very extreme cases, and then it's only done for a few hours or a few days at a time.
And there it was done as control, because I saw it myself. If somebody smarted off or something, they got thrown in there.
Yeah, that's wrong. That's just wrong.
And then this also details several cases, and there were families that their loved ones was arrested for a minor crime, driving on a suspended license. Maybe they stole from a 7-Eleven, some marijuana use, and they ended up dead. These 7 cases within months or days, they ended up dead. So, so I just wanted to mention that's out there, and we'll see, what the powers to be do with that or not.
Yeah.
And then I did want to mention, this is interesting. We talk about smoke and mirrors. There's a bill by Senator Thom Tillis, and it's going to reaffirm some of the pre-existing condition regulations that would be gutted if the Justice Department argument prevails, as we know, in court. Those arguments orally for that case, Tom, begin September the 5th.
Yeah.
So this is a cover your backside bill, of course. But even on top of it, the bill that they're trying to do, it's going to require insurers to provide coverage to people with pre-existing conditions, and it prohibits insurers on the individual market, but not the small group market, from charging those people higher premiums.
Well, and not only that,
doesn't do anything.
Not only that, and this is Thom Tillis, Lamar Alexander, Chuck Grassley, Jody Ernst, Lisa Murkowski, Bill Cassidy, Roger Wicker, Lindsey Graham, Dean Heller, and John Barrasso. Are these all Republicans who have proposed this legislation that they say, and the legislation actually does say, you have to cover people with pre-existing conditions if you sold them a policy that covers those conditions. But if you sell them a policy that specifically says this policy doesn't cover cancer, this policy doesn't cover pregnancy, this policy doesn't cover heart disease, you can advertise it, and they're starting to advertise them on TV now. Now you can buy a cheaper policy than those expensive Obamacare policies, but it doesn't cover cancer. And it's just a scam that these guys are running.
Right. And it's
incredible.
The quote, this was Kaiser's Larry Levitt, Kaiser Permanente. He said it's a very imperfect replacement for the ACA provisions that would be thrown out in the Texas case if you're trying to protect people with pre-existing conditions. And it's not just imperfect; it's worthless.
It's fraud. It's a fraud. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else is up, Bob?
Political statement is exactly what what.
Oh yeah, it's as you said, it's butt covering. I mean, they're just CYA.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And then, of course, it looks like Kavanaugh, unless there's something we don't know, is headed towards, approval. Murkowski, Collins of Maine, Republicans, Manchin, and Heitkamp seem to be signaling they're going to go with him. So I think that would do it.
Now, he has argued against, in 2017, Kavanaugh actually fought allowing a young woman, 17-year-old, in Texas Detention Center from having an abortion. He's said that employers should have the right not to include contraception in health plans. He's opposed to environmental regulations. He believes that the Second Amendment prohibits the government from banning any kind of specific type of gun, like semi-automatic rifles or high-capacity magazines. He dissented from the D.C. healthcare case. It goes on and on. I don't get why people aren't just outraged, freaked out about this guy.
Well, you know what Murkowski of Alaska has said through her press secretary, that, he said the case is settled. Well, that was then. That doesn't mean he'll stay that way.
Oh, yeah. Settled law, saying that that Roe v. Wade is settled law is a very different thing than saying it was correctly decided.
Correct.
Because you can upturn settled law. They do that regularly. Oh, my. Right. These hustlers on the right. Bob Ney, Congressman, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's collected poems. This is the 1841 edition, but there's modern ones available too. It's the same poems. I want to start with a Psalm of Life, one of my favorites, one that I learned as a kid. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow finds us further than today. Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb, driven cattle. Be a hero in the strife. Lives of, I trust no future, however present. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act within the living present, heart within and God o'erhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footsteps in the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another sailing o'er life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing, will take heart again. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing. Learn to labor and to wait. And the book opens with Voices of the Night, another of his brilliant poems. This is from the prelude. Pleasant it was when woods were green and winds were soft and low, to lie amid some sylvan scene where the long drooping boughs between, shadows dark and sunlight sheen, alternate come and go. Or where the denser grove receives no sunlight from above, but the dark foliage interweaves in one unbroken roof of leaves, underneath whose sloping eaves the shadows hardly move. Beneath some patriarchal tree I lay upon the ground. His hoary arms uplifted he, and all the broad leaves over me clap their little hands in glee with one continuous sound. A slumberous sound, a sound that brings the feelings of a dream, as of innumerable wings, as when a bell no longer swings. Faint the hollow murmur rings, o'er meadow, lake, and stream. And dreams of that which cannot die, bright visions come to me, as lapped in thought I used to lie and gaze into the summer sky where the sailing clouds went by like ships upon the sea. Dreams that the soul of youth engage, ere fancy has been quelled. Old legends of the monkish age, traditions of the saint and sage, tales that have the rhyme of age, and chronicles of eld. And loving still these quaint old themes, even in the city's throng, I feel the freshness of the streams that cross by glades and sunny gleams, water the green land of dreams, the holy land of song. Therefore at Pentecost, which brings the spring clothed like a bride, when nestling buds unfold their wings and bishops' caps have golden rings, musing upon many things, I sought the woodlands wide. The green trees whispered low and mild. It was a sound of joy. They were my playmates when a child, and rocked me in their arms so wild, but they looked at me and smiled as if I were a boy. and ever whispered, mild and low, "Come be a child once more," and waved their long arms to and fro, and beckoned solemnly and slow, "Oh, I could not choose but go into the woodlands hoar, into the blithe and breathing air, into the solemn wood, solemn and silent everywhere. Nature with folded hands seemed there, kneeling at her evening prayer. Like one in prayer, I stood. Before me rose an avenue of tall and sombrous pines. Abroad their fan-like branches grew, and where the sunlight darted through, spread a vapor soft and blue, in long and sloping lines. And falling on my weary brain, like a fast falling shower, the dreams of youth come back again, low lispings of the summer rain, dropping in the ripening grain, once upon the flower. Visions of childhood, stay, oh stay, ye were so sweet and wild, and distant voices seem to say, it cannot be, they pass away, other themes demand the lay, thy lay, thou art no more a child. The land of song within thee lies, watered by living springs. The lids of Fanny's sleepless eyes are grates into that paradise. Holy thoughts like stars arise, its clouds are angels' wings. Learn that henceforth thy song shall be, not mountains capped with snow, no forests surrounding like the sea, nor rivers flowing ceaselessly where the woodlands bend to see the bending heavens below. There is a forest where the din of iron branches sounds, a mighty river roars between, and whoever looks therein sees the heavens all black with sin, sees not its depths nor bounds. Look then into thine heart and write, yes, into life's dream, the deep stream. Longfellow.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And hey, just a quick heads up. Yeah, we're going to go on a cruise next summer. That's 2019, in July of 2019. It'll be July 24th. And it's going to be on the Regent's 7th Sea Mariner. This is a luxury cruise ship, and it's going to be an Alaska cruise. And it's an all-suite. It's a small ship, and just really super nice, super high-end. Special discounts, all shore excursions, all meals, many fine restaurants, all drinks, including wine and spirits, all gratuities, no tipping, free Wi-Fi, and all that kind of stuff. If you want to get information about it, check out our website, thomhartmann.com. We've got a link to the whole thing, and where you can get more information and that kind of thing. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that. U.S. student debt has passed $1.5 trillion. We've been inching up toward this for some time now. It's now well over $1.5 trillion. This is a massive drag on our economy. I mean, there is an economic crisis here, there's a political crisis here, and there's a moral crisis here. The moral crisis, and well, really, they're all kind of the same thing. I mean, they're all dimensions of the same thing. We have young people graduating from college so deeply in debt that they can't start families, they can't buy a house, they don't have the means, or they're afraid to start their own businesses. They can't do, like, Louise and I have started 7 businesses in our lives, and every single one from scratch. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was, walking around with $20, $30, $50, $100,000 in student loan debt. And it's harming our country. This is something that we never had before Reaganomics. Just the whole idea that you would go in debt to go to college was something that, by and large, was not even imagined by most people. And we're the only country, the only developed country in the world where you can go to college and end up $100,000 in debt, or even $10,000 in debt. We're literally the only one. I mean, yes, you can end up in debt if you live in some other country and you go to a really fancy schmancy private school, but there's public universities everywhere else. Not so in the United States. This is just wrong, and we need to be doing something about it. A fascinating piece in the Daily Beast is titled "How Brett Kavanaugh," the guy that Donald Trump wants on the Supreme Court because he believes that sitting presidents should not be allowed to be indicted. Brett Kavanaugh worked to weaponize the war on terror. He wrote, these are actual decisions that he authored or dissented from and authored a dissent. So these are his positions, Brett Kavanaugh's positions. He didn't always prevail. He said that there's a broad loophole to the warrant requirement of the Fourth Amendment. You know, the Fourth Amendment says you have the right to be secure in your person, property, and papers in your home. Brett Kavanaugh says, no, not if it includes national security. And you don't even have to specify what the national security is. You just have to declare it if you're a police agency and bust in the door. He says that if the constitutional requirement for an arrest warrant can be done away with altogether if the government simply says that they are acting, quote, with the purpose of preventing terrorist attacks on the United States, end quote. What's a terrorist attack? Who knows? But Brett Kavanaugh doesn't care. He's also accepted national security as a get-out-of-jail-free card to shield FBI agents accused of torturing an American citizen in Kenya, in Somalia, and in Ethiopia. He cites no legal authority for this, by the way. He puts in a footnote pointing to the 9/11 Commission study. This is Brett Kavanaugh. This is what this guy likes. He wrote a dissent about an appeals court case where he was a judge arguing that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, you know, the thing that was created in 2008 to stop another bank crisis, the thing that has the agency that has recovered over $11 billion from banks who've ripped off you and me, that agency is unconstitutional, according to Brett Kavanaugh. The crisis pregnancy centers in California were knocked down by the California Supreme Court. He opposed that decision. He's all in favor of gerrymandering, reversing a lower court decision. This is in 11 Texas congressional districts, racial gerrymandering. That's just fine with him. He was fine with Trump's travel ban. He hates unions, Janus versus AFSCME, for example. He's not a fan of voter rights. He thinks purging voting rolls is just fine. This guy is an absolute shill to great wealth and power. Period, full stop. Which is why, of course, billionaire Trump wants to put him on the Supreme Court, and why billionaire Koch brothers are spending millions of dollars to promote his rising to the top of the Supreme Court, and no doubt some really aggressive lobbying to the Republicans in the Senate. It's only in the Senate where they approve the Supreme Court. So if you, particularly if you've got somebody like Heidi Heitkamp, for example, or Joe Manchin in West Virginia, some of these Democrats have indicated that they're willing, who have met with Brett Kavanaugh and therefore might be willing to vote for him. If you want to let them know your thoughts, 202-225-3121 is the switchboard for the Senate, and it'll get you right through to them. Saudi Arabia arrests people who protest human rights abuses. And back in 2015, they arrested a woman and her husband. They were protesting in a Sunni area that the government was withholding legal protections to Sunnis that it allowed, a Shia area that the Sunni government, the Saudi Arabian government was withholding legal protections to Shia citizens of Saudi Arabia. She is a Shia. She was arrested. They now want to cut her head off. Literally, they want to execute her. It'll be the first execution of a civil rights activist who is a woman. Sarah Leah Whitson of the Human Rights Watch, the Middle East director of Human Rights Watch, said, quote, "Any execution is appalling, but seeing the death penalty for activists like Isra el-Ghomam, who are not even accused of violent behavior, is monstrous. Every day, the Saudi monarchy's unrestrained despotism makes it harder for its public relation teams to spin the fairy tale of reform to allies and international businesses." Incredible. The Republican list of corruption that they're ignoring under Trump, this from the Daily Kos, Laura Clausen writing in the Daily Kos today, is potentially the nightmare that Trump could be facing after November. Will actually be after January. January 20th is when everybody gets sworn into office, if the Democrats take back the House of Representatives. These are issues, and I'd love to get your thoughts on which ones you think should be prioritized by the Democratic Party. These are issues where the Democrats have actually gone to Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell, Democrats in the Senate or the House, have gone to Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell and said, we would like to have an investigation of this, a formal investigation at the committee level of these issues. And of course, Mitch McConnell in the Senate, Paul Ryan in the House have said, no, we're not going to let you do that. But if they get control of the House, they will have subpoena power, and Democrats will be the committee chairs, and they will be able to do these investigations. President Trump's tax returns, the Trump family businesses, and whether they comply with the Constitution's emoluments clause, including the Chinese trademark grant to the Trump Organization. This is from a list, by the way, that Republicans are circulating among themselves. It's their freak-out list. Trump's dealings with Russia, including his preparations for his meeting with Putin. The payment of Stephanie Clifford, a.k.a. Stormy Daniels, James Comey's firing, Trump's firing of U.S. attorneys, Trump's proposed transgender ban for the military, Trump's Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and his business dealings, the White House staff's personal email use. Oh, they were all hysterical about Hillary having a personal. They all have. It's nuts. I mean, this cabinet secretary travel office expenses and other misused perks, discussions of classified information at Mar-a-Lago, right in front of, people who have no security clearances. Jared Kushner's ethics law compliance. These are all things the Democrats have said should be investigated. The travel ban, a dismissal of members of the EPA's Board of Scientific Advisors, the Trump's family separation policy, putting children in cages, the hurricane response in Puerto Rico, election security and hacking attempts. The Republicans don't want to look into that. Democrats want them to. And the White House security clearances, the whole issue around who gets them, who has them, who should, who shouldn't, why, how, all that kind of stuff. These are things that Democrats would like to look into, that Republicans would rather not talk about, and have actively blocked Democrats from looking into, that if you are registered to vote and you show up in the election in November, and we can take back the House of Representatives, we could have these investigations, and we might actually end up with some good governance in the United States. Shocking but true, even in the era of Trump. And it all depends on you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And, of course, as many friends as you can get to the polls, and make sure that they're registered to vote, that they haven't been purged by these Republican malefactors. We'll be back with your calls. And welcome back. Oh, let's see who's been on hold for a while here. Joe in Chino, California. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I want to push back on this notion that public school teachers in the United States have tenure. I was a union rep, an executive board member of my local, and a member of the California Teachers Association State Council at various times for over 15 years. So I know what the law is as far as this goes.
Okay. What's the law?
In California, you can, after 2 years, achieve what's known as permanent status. You can be let go within that 2-year period for any reason, and they don't have to give any justification for it.
Right.
So what permanent status does for you is gives you due process rights. Okay, so there's no such thing as tenure. And to the best of my knowledge, no public school that is, except for post-secondary, no public school in California, in the United States, has any tenure system.
That was my understanding too. I mean, maybe there was some obscure state somewhere that had tenure for non-college teachers, but I thought that to the extent that that existed, and I believe it was in the New York City school system, that was done away with long ago.
Yeah, well, in fact, in Colorado, you can get permanent status, but it can be revoked at any time. So for all intents and purposes, Colorado has no tenure system at all, if you want to call it tenure. That's a misnomer of what the system is.
Yeah.
But, you can go online. You can check stories about Colorado teachers that are leaving Colorado because they can't have any job security.
Yeah.
And this whole notion that unions protect bad teachers is just wrong.
I agree, and but it's a myth that persists, and it persists in part from being pushed by the people who want to privatize education, and it's pushed in part by Republicans who hate unions because unions traditionally support Democrats because unions are all about the workers, not about the big bosses.
Right, but what your listeners should know is that I have a legal responsibility as a union representative. I must represent equally and fairly every member if there's a complaint brought against them or some action against them.
Right.
I do not have a choice. It's not my job, in fact, and I'm not legally permitted to decide who is a good teacher and who's a bad teacher. My job is protecting the contract.
So how does California, we have about 35 seconds here, Joe, how does California deal with bad teachers?
It's the responsibility of the administrator to follow the procedures that are outlined in state law as to how to get rid of a teacher.
So you basically lay out the charges against the teacher. You say, okay, you did this and this and this, and these qualify you as a bad teacher. You're out of here. The teacher can protest, but it's a process that's held before what, a school board?
It's outlined in state law. It's called the RODA Act.
Mm-hmm.
RODDA.
Okay. Is it a form of arbitration or is it a form of a trial?
Well, it's, the administration has to go through procedure. Depends on what the accusations are. Is it bad teaching or is it, child abuse?
Right.
It's going to depend on what the accusation is.
I see. Okay, makes perfect sense. Joe, thanks a lot for cleaning that up. I really appreciate it. Thank you. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Speaking the truth, some multinational corporations would really rather to know all about Thom Hartmann on the with you and on the line with us. Chris in Salem, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Tom, there is a very real strategy at work, and this is alluding to the previous hour on, we have callers that call into the program, and they all lecture us on centrism. Well, I'm a centrist, and I'm just in the middle of the road, and I'm a moderate. Well, I think that it's important for listeners to know there's a very real effort from the Koch Foundation and other right-wing groups that's targeting, I'm a millennial, I'm 28, so not only do I get your show on YouTube, but, others. One centrist, her name is Roaming Millennial, and she used to say, I'm a moderate, I'm a centrist, and she got picked up by Conservative Review Television. That's Mark Levin's, outfit. And so, you have commentators like Dave Rubin where they do this kind of soft peddling of libertarians saying that, we're centrist and we're against the war on drugs and we're against policing the world. And then they kind of insert these weird kind of things like, let's deregulate everything. And it's just kind of soft where they're trying to get people that are on the fence about it. And they don't tell you that the Democratic Party supports things like we're against the war on drugs, but they come off as a centrist. So they're inviting this allure. And that's kind of a strategy at work.
Yeah. I've always pointed out that libertarians, in addition to being opposed to any kind of government program at all other than police and the Army, and therefore, they want to do away with everything from Medicare to Social Security to public schools. I mean, literally, they don't believe in public education. But they do think that there should not be laws against prostitution, and they do think that there should not be laws against personal drug use. And so I describe them as Republicans who want to smoke dope and get laid. I think that's a pretty good description. Thanks a lot for the call. Your points are well made. Nathaniel in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Hey, Nathaniel, what's up?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. Love your show.
Thanks.
No one's addressing the 1.3 million or so white voters in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin who switched their votes from Obama to Trump from 12 to 16.
Mm-hmm.
And those voters, I don't think you can call them racist. I mean, I don't know them personally, but they clearly voted for an African American for president twice. Those voters, and living in Lebanon, I'm amongst them, are absolutely view things such as subsidized or free college tuition, single-payer health care, advocacy for climate change, and a whole host of progressive causes. I think there's widespread support amongst that caucus, if you will, for those causes. But I have to tell you that this.
Nathaniel, your phone is breaking up. Nathaniel, I haven't heard anything you said for the last 3 or 4 seconds. Repeat your last sentence.
What my last sentence was that this abolish ICE sanctuary city drum that is being beat is doing more to energize those 1.3 million largely white, non-college educated voters to vote, to either not participate or to vote for Trump than all the positive programming that can be put forward.
I think you may well be right. Although, you know, to some extent that is the racist vote. But the other point that I would make, and Nathaniel, thanks for the call. Your phone is just completely disintegrated here on us. I think the larger point that I would make about people who voted for Obama twice and then voted for Trump, and I think it's a relatively small segment, but a meaningful segment of the population. Without those people, Trump would not be in the White House right now. That they were voting for change. These were people who were sick and tired of the status quo. They did not want what we have right now. They wanted actual change. They voted for Obama, hoping to get change. We got, you know, a national health care system, sort of, but then the Supreme Court took it apart. The Republicans have been taking it apart ever since with Obamacare. We got some change, but not a whole lot under the Obama administration. He only had 74 days where he had a Congress that would go along with him, and the Republicans were totally trying to block him on everything he did. So people still wanted change. This country was so ripe for change in 2008. We wanted basically an FDR kind of politician. We wanted somebody to come along and say, we're going to change things. Don in Jackson, Michigan, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to call and apologize. I cannot recommend your show to anybody that I know or anybody here in Jackson for the simple reason they all think I'm pretty smart, and I get all my material from you. So if I tell them about you, they'll know where I get that material.
Well, thank you, Don. I think that's a compliment.
It is a compliment.
That's a good one. That's a good one. So, right, so are you actually able to win arguments these days using some of my arguments?
Oh, I win a lot of arguments. Believe me, I don't stop until I win.
That's great. That's great. Are you finding that the Trump voters you know in Jackson, Michigan are starting to have second thoughts, or are they still stuck in their Foxiverse?
And actually, you know what? They are having second thoughts. I see the signs coming down, and that's a good sign because there really are some good Republicans out there. And I believe the ones here in Jackson, Michigan, being the birthplace of the Republican Party, are very good Republicans, and they see right through the lies and the criminal and all that stuff. So yeah. I'm very much satisfied with what's going on as far as that part. You know,
that's great.
They're kind of giving up on.
Don, that's a great story, and thanks for calling. Thanks for your kind words, and keep spreading the good word. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. We'll be back with more of your calls and more of the news of the day right after this. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Talk media for the sane among us. Indeed. We'll be back. For our book club today, we're reading Out of the Wreckage, A New Politics for an Age of Crisis by George Monbiot. This is from Chapter 3, Don't Look Back. The political history of the second half of the 20th century could be summarized as the conflict between its two great narratives, neoliberalism and social democracy. Social democracy in this era, whose story I briefly summarized in Chapter 1, acquired much of its power and coherence from the thinking of one remarkable man. Across 4 decades, John Maynard Keynes's work dominated economic thought and practice. During the period the French called the Trente Glorieuses, 1945 to 1975, his prescriptions are widely credited with reviving economies and distributing their benefits. That they remain more or less the only mainstream alternative to neoliberalism today reveals a remarkable stagnation of both thought and ambition. The first and most obvious problem with an attempt to use Keynesian social democracy as a core political narrative is that the story is more than 80 years old. Political stories need to be renewed. If politics does not feel fresh, it struggles to kindle the imaginative excitement from which hope arises. The second problem is that the surviving enthusiasm for Keynes among mainstream parties is highly selective. It has been reduced in most cases to lowering interest rates when economies are sluggish and engaging in tepid counter-cyclical public spending, which means injecting public money into the economy when unemployment is high or recession threatens. Other Keynesian measures, such as raising taxes when an economy grows quickly to dampen the boom-bust cycle, the fixed exchange rate system, capital controls, and a self-balancing global banking system, an international clearing union, all of which Keynes saw as essential complements to these policies, have been discarded and forgotten. Not only does this ensure that the rich old story has been reduced to two thin chapters, whose loss of context destroys their narrative power, but the absence of other Keynesian measures, as well as changed global circumstances, weakens the effectiveness of the remaining elements of policy. Let me give you an example. In 2009, in the hope of boosting the economy in the wake of the financial crash, the British government spent £300 million on stimulating sales of new cars. Under its scrappage scheme, if car owners traded in their old vehicles for new ones, the government, with the help of manufacturers, knocked £2,000 off the price. This lavish program was partly justified as an environmental measure, though it was clear from the outset that it would lead to a rise in environmental impacts as the materials and energies used in manufacturing new cars outweigh any likely savings from better fuel economy. Its primary purpose was to boost British car assembly plants and protect the jobs of their workers. But European state aid rules forbade such schemes from discriminating between cars made in Britain and cars made abroad. British car parts assembled only some 15% of the vehicles sold in that country, which meant that 85% of the benefit went to car plants in Germany, Japan, and other manufacturing nations. We could see this spending as foreign aid to some of the world's richest nations. The current pattern of globalization, which developed partly as a result of abandoning the fixed exchange rates and capital controls that Keynes advocated, ensures that this problem is to some extent repeated wherever Keynesian stimulus spending is applied. It might lead to a general, if scarcely detectable, global economic uplift, but the domestic impact will necessarily be weaker than Keynes intended. This issue is compounded by the phenomena of job-free growth, caused in part by the automation now spreading into almost every economic sector. Today, governments pull the starter cord, spending public money and cutting interest rates, that ignited the economy and employment in the past, only to discover that it snaps before the motor fires. Two feeble measures, removed from the rich framework of thought and narrative in which they were once embedded, have little chance of sustaining a political revival. Another issue is that the troubles that beset the Keynesian model in the 1970s have not disappeared. While the oil embargo of '73 was the immediate trigger for the lethal combination of high inflation and high unemployment, called stagflation back then, that Keynesian policies were almost powerless to counteract. Problems with the system had been mounting for years. Falling productivity and rising costs push inflation, wages and prices pursuing each other upwards, were already beginning to erode support for Keynesian economics. Most importantly, perhaps, the program had buckled in response to the political demands of capital. Strong financial regulations and controls on the movement of money began to weaken in the 1950s as governments started to liberalize financial markets. Richard Nixon's decision in '71 to suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold destroyed the system of fixed exchange rates on which much of the success of Keynes's policies depended. The capital controls introduced to prevent financiers and speculators from sucking money out of balanced Keynesian economies collapsed. Today, it's hard to find a mainstream politician in Europe or the Anglophone nations, including those who call themselves Keynesians, prepared to call for their reintroduction. We cannot hope that the strategies deployed by global finance that helped to destroy the efficacy of Keynes's measures in the '70s will be unlearned. If the soft Keynesianism proposed by opponents of neoliberalism is to amount to anything but tinkering, it has to confront a wider set of challenges than most of its advocates have yet been prepared to acknowledge. But perhaps the biggest problem residual Keynesianism confronts in the 21st century is that When it does work, it collides headfirst with the environmental crisis. The book, Out of the Wreckage by George Monbiot. Welcome back. It's Thom Hartmann here with you. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. John in Tualatin, Oregon. Hey, John, thanks for calling and for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Just wanted to address some of the issues that the professor from Loyola brought up, which to me is frustrating. I know you don't like to talk bad. I'm not going to talk bad about him and address that. I'm just address the general concepts here. But what disturbs me is we should have outrage. This guy's on there propagating. I'm a teacher. I'm all about academic freedom, but and having discourse. But the guy is sitting there selling total BS about this to his students. And this is a nationwide network, over 500 schools in the Koch network supporting this guy and other guys. And I appreciate you having him on so that we can become aware. I think more of your listeners need to get out and be aware of these things and fight it at the school board level. This is happening at the high school level now. Your caller about the strikes and stuff that are going on. The school boards have been taken over by the right wingers. They know what's trying to go, and they want to protect their territory. But this is an effort that goes back 6 decades. As you mentioned, the 1 year in Virginia, which you didn't realize, and I've heard you say that for years, is that it went on in Virginia for over a decade, Tom.
Really?
And where they closed the schools and they made them private school voucher.
Right. And that went on for more than a year?
Yeah, they closed all the black schools. I'll tell you the chapter. I got one chapter I wanted to reference about Chile in Democracy in Chains. I don't know if you've actually read it. I know you had Nancy McLean on. I just got through reading Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains. I highly encourage everybody to read it.
It is brilliant. It absolutely, that and Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, those two books should be required reading by everybody in the United States.
Especially everybody that's a damn politician.
Yeah.
It's like that's the one thing that, you have to know what's really going on. Yeah. And, that's the one thing, if we're going to ask our Democratic candidates for Congress and for government what their beliefs are, we should say, have you read these two books to know what's really going on? Because most people don't know because, like you said, the mainstream media is not going to address it.
Yep.
But in Virginia, it went on until a court case in 1968, which brings me to my next point, that what James Buchanan did when he first started out this Virginia school garbage, he got it.
James Buchanan, by the way, for people who don't know, is the kind of the arch villain of Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains. He is the conservative / libertarian economist / philosopher who promoted what is today the modern hard right and the libertarian right. Back to you. Feel free to clean up that definition if you want, John.
Yes, and the thing that they wanted to take. Buchanan realized they had to change the system so that the minority could win. Because what they saw in the Brown versus Board of Education ruling was the loss of property rights and these things in a whole different way of freedom than everybody else in America did. And they've been doing everything they can to subvert democracy ever since. Yep. And the main way that they've really been trying to get at it is this, with the whole Federalist Society and the courts. And this all ties into Kavanaugh and all that. And won't go into that. But this is this way of taking over the government, and they have begun to with them by a minority, and this is what he's trying. And using the court system as the last. They saw the courts as the last evil empire. And if you go and you look at Chile and what happened in Chile, and even though they got out of Pinochet and all that stuff and eventually moved on, they can't escape it because they changed the Constitution in so many ways that the supermajority still is required for too many things. Right. So it's left a ultra rich class there with just like too many.
And this is what the Trump Network is trying to do right now with their call for a constitutional convention. They want to change the U.S. Constitution in the same ways.
And people need to be aware of that.
Yeah, and they did this in Oregon. I mean, it's and they did it by ballot initiative. That if the legislature wants to raise taxes, they have to have a supermajority. If they want to increase spending, they have to have a supermajority. It's crazy.
And I teach that in my civics classes, is that we have to understand the failure of what that the problems that presents in terms of governance and how it allows a minority to control the will of the American people. As you state all the time, the majority of American people want all those social programs that you were going off on. And let me say one last thing as a teacher. One of the things that what will make America's schools great, and Michael Moore brought this out in his movie, is if we did the opposite of what they're trying to do. If we forced the closure of private schools where schools could charge tuition and said you can't charge tuition like Finland schools did, we would see the ultra-rich care about the public schools more.
That's
and
right.
You got to have equal funding, or you can't even compare apples and oranges. There's no. I've taught in different districts in Alabama and in Oregon, and the difference is stark. When there's funding, it's there. When you have poverty, the schools are going to suck. And we do this even within schools, though. And one thing that disturbs me, and I'm all about giving kids opportunities, but we've begun such a push to allow kids to have AP courses, and we take the talented kids out of the classroom with the average kids, and then the average kids don't have anybody that's a role model in the school, in that class, and they don't get that the people that are going to challenge thinking, and so we've subverted it, and that's also done racially around this country as a way to keep the schools racially divided.
And that was Buchanan's whole thing. I mean, when he first started as a right-wing activist, it was in my recollection of, it's been a couple of years since I read Nancy's book, but my recollection is that it was in Virginia at the time that Virginia was saying, no to public education because of the required integration by Brown v. Board.
Yes. And it's been everything they could do to try to push back. And so that's where the alarms need to be understood, that what's really going on is much deeper and sinister than the stuff that's thrown out for the masses to debate over these issues. This goes to the heart of what they're trying to undermine and to gut. And that's why we have the inequality problems we have today, because they don't want to let it become a democracy.
And that's why that's why everybody's working to maintain a property tax based school system, so that we've got some really, really good high end public schools here in Portland. My two new grandchildren attend one of them, two of them. And, they're in very affluent neighborhoods, and they're just kicking ass. They're doing great academically, and, a broad spectrum of programs and music and poetry and foreign languages and everything. And then you've got schools that are in poorer areas that don't have those resources. And it's just, we've been the whole idea of funding schools with property taxes was a way of keeping poor communities poor and rich communities rich. And, that class rigidity is what's hurting this country so badly.
Exactly, and until we wake up to that and we begin to force, because it's the people like the kids you described, like in the affluent neighborhoods and so forth, they feel like if the others get something, they're going to lose out. Yeah. And it's not that they lose out; it's that these others have a chance to have opportunities that we're right now basically depriving these. And it's not just in the poor urban inner city areas like your guy on the show was trying to say. It's a lot of small towns all across the Midwest that are so-called Trump territory, where they don't get these opportunities, and they don't even aware of why they're getting such few academic opportunities or economic opportunities, because in this day and age of the internet, you can live anywhere and start companies and thrive, but we aren't giving them the basic opportunities in those schools, so they're going to suffer, because again, it goes back to what you said, the property tax issue. So just wanted to throw that out. So
thanks, John.
Mouthful, but
very, very well said. It's a really important issue. Thank you for the call. I appreciate it. Let's see here. Sam in Canton, North Carolina, listening to us on 101.1 FM. Hey, Sam, what's up?
I have something to say about the Space Force. And Trump seems to be the only person in Washington, D.C. that thinks it's a good idea. There is so much space junk in orbit now that I believe the International Space Station's been hit by a piece. I know the MOL, Manned Orbiting Laboratory, was hit by a piece of it. It's this stuff traveling in low Earth orbit at 17,500 miles an hour. That's an incredibly high speed. Even a grain of sand can do damage. A higher Earth orbit, 22,000 miles an hour. Now, if we have a war in space, there is going to be so much junk orbiting the Earth that we can't put anything in orbit without it being destroyed. Now, what are we going to lose? Pentagon's going to lose its space satellites. You know how much they love their spy satellites. We're going to lose our communication satellites, your cell phones. A lot of stuff won't work anymore. Most dangerous we will lose our weather satellites. So we will not know if something like Hurricane Harvey is actually going to hit land or do some damage.
And we'll lose our GPS systems.
Oh, yeah, those two. Hey, people have to start reading maps again. What a terrible... It's just an idea I want to throw out because it will totally destroy our satellite systems.
Yeah, a war in space would be an absolute disaster. People tend to think that space is like this infinite thing, but actually the low Earth and the high Earth and the middle Earth orbital bands are fairly narrow, because you've got a perfectly balanced centrifugal force and gravity in order to stay at that level, and that's why those levels are filled with satellite debris now, and it is a real problem. Excellent point, Sam. Thanks for the call and thanks for making it. A very good point. Joel in Chicago. Hey, Joel, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to push back a little on this whole private versus public thing that's been a trend today.
Mm-hmm.
And what I wanted to say is, I think the most dangerous thing that kind of came out of like the Reagan years is this whole public sector, big government is spooky, and the private industry will fix all of our woes.
Right.
And if you take a good look at, that unionization is at 4%, and a lot of these places, such like Monsanto and such, are in so many cases giving people horrible working conditions and health disasters. If there wasn't like the government like these people want there to be, we would be in so much trouble because we wouldn't know that they're doing all these terrible things.
Yep.
And I think
and privatization is a way of hiding those faults, those problems, Joel. And it's one of the reasons that the Republicans love it. Joel, your point is really well made. Thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it. It is 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be back with more of your calls after this. And welcome back. Bert, watching us on Free Speech TV in Groveland, Florida. Hey, Bert, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I wanted to talk about the so-called power of the teachers' unions.
Mm-hmm.
I taught for 31 years. I've been retired for 27 years, but I think most of these things are still true. First of all, teachers are in a profession, it's about the only profession I know of where you get punished for experience. And by that I mean if you, say, have taught 15 or 20 years and because of circumstances need to move, you're put on a salary schedule below where your experience would indicate you should be. It used to be you would probably be started on level 5.
You mean it's based on how many years you've taught in that particular school district as opposed to how many years you've taught, period?
Yes.
I got it.
And in some cases you might, if you're lucky, be put on level 10. But it is still, in a way, a punishment. As far as salaries, when I retired after 31 years of teaching, I was making about the same as a beginning garbage collector in San Francisco. And I had 3 degrees, including a doctorate. As far as tenure and evaluation, the union has always said that you can remove teachers for incompetence, but you have to give them a fair chance by setting up a process for improvement and giving them a chance to show improvement. And in a number of cases that actually happens. People do improve. The difference between being in a classroom and being in an education class at a university are very strikingly different things.
What do you mean?
Well, just the reality of being in a classroom and having to confront students every day with a valid learning experience and preparing for that and evaluation and so on, and especially discipline, it's just overpowering to a lot of beginning teachers.
Yeah.
Especially if they don't have a partner or someone to sort of mentor them.
Is there a high level of dropout in the first year of education of new teachers?
High. Very high.
Because they're just not prepared for it.
Years.
Maybe teachers, in medical school, one of my kids is going through medical school through a PA program right now. And she's out doing rounds and rotations and whatnot. And she's still a student, but she's doing minor surgeries and she's assisting in procedures and she's, interviewing patients and things. Maybe there should be a more experiential part, a practicum part of teacher education. Or is there, and I just don't know about it?
Yeah, that's available, but unfortunately, it's been my experience. I was a graduate assistant while I was working on my doctorate, and they don't give a lot of help.
Yeah, okay. Fascinating.
Other things, one that I think is interesting is that it seems to be an unwritten law that the lowest paid administrator has to make more than the highest paid teacher.
Yeah, and that's pretty bizarre. Bert, thank you for the call, and thanks for setting the record straight and all this stuff, and for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Fred? Fred, you are on the air.
Hey, finally.
What's up?
I have 3 points. One is that it would be neat if we could legislate that no person could be on the board of a corporation than one corporation, period.
Okay. So you want to stop interlocking boards, basically.
Oh, man, I could go on and on. I won't.
Yeah, have you ever seen the website, Fred, theyrule.net?
I've been around, I'm 85. I've been around computers for 29 years.
Yeah, this is an amazing website. It's theyrule, THEYRULE.net. And it's got a list of all the Fortune 500 companies. You click on a company and it shows you the board of directors. Yeah. And then you can click on another company and it shows you how the boards are interlocked. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's disgusting. The second point that I'd like to make is that it is not hard to get. You can actually Google this number. The revenue per employee should be published on every product every corporation makes.
Okay. That's
my last look at General Motors was $1,680,000.
So each employee is producing $1 million.
It was $138,000.
Right. This is a measure
that can be taken from the cost of goods sold section of the profit and loss statement. That's true.
Right. It's a measure of productivity. So you can see over time as productivity goes up, wages don't. It used to be as productivity went up, wages also went up. But that all changed in 1980 when Reagan reconfigured the nature of our economy.
Yeah. Let me get my last point in. We have wage and hour laws for people that wait on table and people that, we need a wage and hour law for CEOs. My recollection of the Second World War after Hiroshima was that part of the recovery of Japan was that this cannot be accurate, but the principle is accurate. No CEO at that time could make more than 10 times the lowest paid employee.
The average was 20 times going into the Reagan administration, and the reason why, it wasn't that there was a law against it, it was because the tax rate hit 74% when you got more than 20 times your average employee. So no company would pay that because, hey, why spend 74% of your income to the government? And I think that's...
the CEO doesn't really generate anything. The people on the floor are the ones that generate the revenue.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Fred, well said. Thank you very much for the call. Let's see here. Steve in Park Ridge, Illinois. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Always enjoyed talking to you. The Alaskan cruise, Seven Seas Marina. I was on it just this last July.
Really? I hear it's a great cruise ship.
Oh, it's just phenomenal. We've actually been on it twice in Europe, that same line and that same exact ship.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just mention that of all the trips we've ever taken, this past one was my wife's favorite, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
We traveled from Anchorage down to Vancouver and it got on the Rocky Mountaineer Railroad and went to Banff. But in any event, I wanted to mention to any of your listeners, it's first class all the way. The other thing is that I was in the streets of Chicago yesterday with what I was kind of disappointed with. It was a protest against the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. Dan Sikowski spoke, and I was just sort of unimpressed with how few people there were because this is such an important issue. I did take some pictures. I'm the concerned citizen that you've had call before. We're now up to 21,000 followers, so if anyone's interested, concerned citizen on Facebook. But this Kavanaugh confirmation is just going to ruin civil liberties for years to come.
I agree. And it's going to also destroy workers' rights. And it's going to destroy privacy rights. I mean, Brett Kavanaugh is a troglodyte. He's a throwback to the Lochner court, to the 1920s.
He's prehistoric.
Yeah.
And this will be the Trump legacy when he's long gone. The courts. It's just I'm so sorry for our children.
Yep, the Trump-Pence legacy. Let's make it clear.
Like.
Yep, I'm with you. Steve, thanks a lot for the call. Thanks for listening to us on WCPT there in Chicago. The station, by the way, that is collaborating with us on this cruise, it's WCPT and us. The information is on their website and also on ours at thomhartmann.com. Anyhow, it's been a great day. I'm so glad to be back. I got more stories to tell you about Canada. We'll get to them tomorrow. And in the meantime, keep an eye on the news and get out there and get active. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. And there are so many things that we all can do. And it feels so good to do them, right? So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon. and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.